Welcome everybody to the 2024 Montana Brownfields Workshop. We're going to go ahead and kick things off and get started. My name, for those of you, I have a lot of familiar faces, which is very exciting for me. I always like to move to Montana, and then a lot of new faces, and that's even doubly exciting because that just means more work. My name is Maggie Bellinger. I'm the Senior Director for the Kansas State Technical Assistance to Brownfields program, and we are okay, so some housekeeping before we get to that, sorry. For the virtual participants, just a reminder, if you lose connectivity or you have any issues while you're joining us today and tomorrow, please reach out to our tech support by calling 785-200-7005 or sending an email to chsr@ksu.edu, and they'll try to help you get reconnected and get back to where you need to be. For the folks here in person and virtually, all the sessions are being recorded, so they will be posted to the event webpage post-event, and then we will have copies of all the presentation materials on that webpage also. So if you do lose connectivity or something happens here, you will still have access to all the information. And then for our online participants, just to help with bandwidth as well as background noise, since this is a hybrid event, we just ask that you're on mute. There will be opportunities for you to unmute yourself, turn your video on, and engage. And so feel free to do that. If you have any questions online, please put them in the chat. We have someone monitoring the chat room. And so they will post the questions to the group here, and we'll be good to go. When you do submit your questions online, please submit them to everyone, just so we can make sure to get your questions answered. Oh, that's okay. That's it. And here are QR codes. This will give you direct access to our event webpage. Like I said, the recordings after the event, all the presentation slides. We have some exercises and handouts as part of the event this week, and all those resources and materials will be available on the webpage that you can access through this QR code and the webpage. A big shout out to our sponsors for helping us with this event today. This is Technical Assistance to Brownfields DEQ, federally state funded, so having refreshments or having snacks, food, things like that are just really difficult for us to do, and so we really rely on our sponsors to help support us in that. So a big shout out to these guys up here. And if you're in the room, you can raise your hand, and I think they deserve a round of applause. So thank you so much. Okay, circling back. So technical assistance to Brownfields. Again, Maggie Bellinger. I'm here with my colleague, Kate Lucas. Technical Assistance to Brownfields, or TAB. We are a nationally funded program through the US EPA Brownfields program, and we get to offer free support to communities that are undergoing community revitalization, economic redevelopment through that brownfield lens. So abandoned properties, dilapidated buildings. What do you do with them? How do you start going around about them? What's funding available? We can come into communities and help you. All the assistance that we get to offer and provide is at free, absolutely no cost to the community, other than your time to meet with us, chat with us, maybe entertain us. And so we at Kansas State, we are the TAB provider for EPA regions 5, 6, 7, and 8. Montana is in region 8, so 21 states, all the states that are there purple on the map. And then there are 4 other TAB providers that provide this type of service all across the US. And then with that, quick introduction of myself and TAB. I'm going to pass it to Greg. Greg, can you come up here? Because it's hybrid, there's virtual, it's really helpful for us in person to use the microphone so they can hear us.
Oh, did you want from me? Okay.
Hi.
Hi. I'm Greg Davis. I'm with EPA. Anybody at any time come by and stop and talk to me and ask me any questions. Nothing's off the table. So I've been at EPA 26 years, 27, 26 years in basically every program. Brownfields being the last for the last 8 years. I focus mostly on Montana and Southwest Colorado. So being there the longest, I get the good areas. And then, so, yeah, I'll be giving some presentations and I work in the areas of RLF, assessment grants, cleanup grants, state and travel grants, policy setting, everything, every part of the program. So anything you have, ask me or make recommendations, or if something you don't like, feel free to complain about it and see if I can do something about it. Oh, these are the people in Montana. So you'll see this slide if you want to. These are all the people working in Montana. Barbara Benoit, Natalie Hamilton is our new employee. She's remote out of, I believe it's Atlanta right now. So she may be coming to the office. Curtis Jeffries, who does a lot of RLF work. Joanne Deploy, and Stephanie Shen. Those are. I didn't write down the exact grants that they're working on because it's always changing and we're always getting new employees or people are retiring. So that always fluctuates, but these are the Montana folk.
All right, and next up we have our wonderful Montana DEQ team.
Hi, my name is Jason Seiler. I'm one of the Montana coordinators. I've been doing Brownfields since 2009. For that, before we do this, just additional housekeeping. Restrooms are straight back. The women are straight back through the kind of head towards the lamp and then to the right. The men's is to just diagonally to the right. Emergency exits. There's one out this way and then to the right, and then you're out the building. If you guys want to come back in, if you're interested in coming in that way instead of trying to wind your way through the maze, you can do that, or you just get downstairs. And that's safety off now. But welcome to Montana Brownfields Workshop. This is one of our cool. If you haven't seen, we're really excited. Renee here, she's the one that created him. Pretty awesome. We really like him. But it's just kind of an idea to generate a little buzz about the Brownfields program, and just kind of better than a business card. So next slide.
I think I made switches.
Okay.
So go forward.
Okay. So this is us. This is your Brownfields team, Montana. Again, I've been doing Brownfields since 2009. Started in 2006, and Elaine was my cube mate way back in 2006. And unfortunately, I was able to recruit her back, and yeah, and it's us. Elaine.
Employee one, I've actually been with DEQ for almost 20 years, but with Brownfields for 2. And Jason and I met when we were working with the state supervisor. So anyway, we're thrilled that you're here. So, oh, and also I just wanted to mention, there's bathrooms all over this building. So if you can't get into one of these, there's lots of other ones, but don't get lost. This place is in these.
And if anybody needs to use the elevator, it does work. You do have to open both doors and close both doors behind you before it works. So just doesn't have to, but don't use it in the emergency.
Yeah, I'm Jordan Williams, into the Brownfield program. Pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to listening and learning here over the next day and a half. And like to say, yeah, thanks for everybody showing up and being here as well.
And okay, I got it. Okay, here we go. So originally, longest time before the bipartisan infrastructure law and influx of Brownfields money, we were a 2-person program, Brownfields. We've grown exponentially to 3, as you just saw. And so historically, we were kind of separated into petroleum focused and hazardous substance focused. Now we are kind of more regionally. So I'm the kind of the pink, just as a point of contact, or if you have a call about brownfields, these are kind of your regional kind of contacts. And so I'm the one in the pink in the middle. George is going to be handling kind of the aqua on either side, and Colleen's based. So Colleen's in the Kalispell office, George is in the Missoula office, I'm here in the home office. We're kind of geographically spread around and we're diverse, but we work all over the place in all the sites. So that's kind of who we are. So again, Jason Seiler, Montana DQ. Welcome to the main theater. We've been fortunate enough to have Brownfields workshops at a number of really cool places. All this isn't wine snug at our hotel. It's still a pretty amazing building. We first started doing Brownfields on this site. Walking through this. This is a kind of a hidden gem, Helena. Almost everybody I talk to about it is like, what's that building? Where is that? I've never been in that building. How is it? And it's like, it is, as you can see, it's pretty amazing. So we wanted to kind of show it off. So to start this, for those new in the room, that we made a couple of May and great staff at DQ made a couple of short videos. The first one is just going to be talking about kind of an intro to Brownfields and how it pertains to this building itself. So start with that.
I'm Sarah Seitz and I work at Montana DEQ. So here in the former Ming Opera Theater and the adjacent building, the Light and Traction building, we are using Brownfields money to assess environmental conditions that could hinder or slow down redevelopment or reuse of the property for the community. DEQ got involved because the Montana Business Assistance Connection here in Helena was looking at reuses of buildings and determined that this was a great area that could potentially provide a lot of opportunity in Helena. They reached out to DEQ and we use our Brownfields money to help assess if there's environmental conditions that can be addressed prior to that redevelopment. Right now we're at the step of the process where DEQ has started the environmental assessment of the building, and we have consultants that we've hired that have come in and looked to see if there's many environmental conditions in a phase 1 assessment, and then they're stepping in to do some actual sampling to see how much of the building needs work. For example, they'll be looking at tiles for asbestos, or they'll be looking at paint or wall coverings for lead conditions. So this project is important to DEQ because there are so many places, especially in Helena and throughout our communities, that have spaces like this that are really interesting and important, but they need to be brought up to 21st century conditions and they need to be safe in order for everyone in their community to figure out what's next. This is happening here in Helena, but it can happen anywhere across the state for buildings like this. DEQ's Brownfields program is pretty unique in that it helps you move past environmental conditions by providing technical expertise and funding to help developers really get past that environmental conditions, and so that they can focus on the ideas and the plans and the redevelopment in their community.
So pretty.
How to open your car door while submerged.
Yeah.
We'll save that for after. So that's Brownfields in a nutshell. And before we received all of this bipartisan infrastructure law funding, that was pretty much what in the Brownfields world we were focusing on. We were doing phase 1s, phase 2s, and then assistance. One of the great things about the bipartisan infrastructure law is it was a once in hopefully not a lifetime influx in Brownfields, and with that we at DEQ went after a statewide assessment grant, and we were awarded that grant, and that gave us money to do things that we've always dreamed of, but we never had the funding for. And so when Brian or Catherine, if you guys want to come up and kind of talk about what and where and how. So we did the phase 1, phase 2 for MBAC, at MBAC's request, because it was kind of the a hidden gem of Helena, right? And then what happened? We did phase 1, phase 2, and we actually, I mean, everybody thinks it's like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be an old building, it's gonna be full of asbestos and everything. Actually, we didn't find hardly anything. There's colored floor tiles, the 9x9 floor tiles are pretty much it. Both here on this one little hallway, and then downstairs in the main, kind of the dining room down there. That's relatively really it, and that's pretty easy. So we kind of dodged a bullet there, but that's what Brownfields is for, is it's for kind of figuring out what's actually here before you invest in Brownfields. And so then what happened?
So I will just announce, we've got Ron and Cameron back here who are one of our clients who is looking to utilize this building. I know Catherine, not my Catherine, but the other Catherine, the idea that we're in a downtown tip district. So we've got this ability to try to utilize tax income and finance to improve the taxable value, the utilization of properties. We knew for a long time that this was a building that was being underutilized, built roughly 1888. So the shrine, the Masons and the Shriners were in a building next door. They wanted one of the bigger spaces in the States. They started to move up. They then built what we call now our Civic Center, which can handle 1,500 people. By the time they finished it, their membership within the Masons started to decline. And then when the earthquake hit, they couldn't maintain that building. They gave it to the city and ended up buying this facility. What I love about the Masons is they put their new facade on, they did some improvements for utilization, and then they never touched the building again. To Jason's point, we've got a little bit of tile. You go down to the boilers, the old steam boilers weren't even packed with asbestos like you would expect in any old boiler, because it is what it is. That took expense and time. They operated it the way they have since that point. This is our second Masonic building that we've started working on down in Townsend. We had another Masonic lodge who, one of my first offices doing this was next door. And when you start to watch the little old guys get a little older and a little older, and then fewer and fewer because they're fewer and fewer, finally we got to a point where we had a conversation with them. What do you really want to do? And in that case, it was time for them to move on. We got a new buyer. We did another Brownfield study. Department of Commerce assisted us on some work, and we now have a community theater upstairs, some apartments, childcare facility. I mean, we started to do what we needed to do with the repurposing that building. Using TIF dollars, we did some study just to see how structural this building was, and we realized, except for ADA compliance, this building made it through the earthquake very well. Which is then we started kind of pitching the idea of who would like this, what we were calling Goldilocks kind of place. The Civic Center, 1,500 people. The Myrna right uptown or just above us here is about 200 people. So if you have an event that's somewhere in between, we had no place to go to do that. And if you did, you would go out of the city, out into East Helena, just into Jefferson County to a big barn out there. So we were trying to find who might be the right size opportunity. And that's when we started talking to the Helena Symphony, that could this be, and again, using some of our planning talk, could this become third space for downtown Helena? How do we create an attractor that brings people and energy to downtown that then can kind of spill out after an event, after an opportunity, a wedding, a symphony presentation, a Myrna viewing of a movie. So that's where our mind was at. We found the client, and then we looked at this beast of a building. I had a general study, but how much does it cost to put it together? But I think the key that we spent a lot of energy on is how do you make the building self-sufficient? Because We already have enough not-for-profits. We have enough buildings that we're struggling to maintain and manage. How do we create a design so this building doesn't become a financial burden? And Cameron, who has to find money to keep the symphony going, doesn't need to be doing that for the building also, which is when we reached out to our friend Jason, who is an egghead like the rest of us.
Yeah, and so Brian reached out and was like, hey, we'd really like, we've got an interested entity, the symphony. They're interested in the space, but they want to know, how's it going to pencil out? How's it going to work? How could it be redesigned? And we could get the kind of the generic PAR, preliminary architectural report, but wouldn't it be cool if we actually gave them the tools to really sink their teeth into and really kind of actually figure out if this can work? So at that point, we said yes. We actually wrote a memorandum of agreement with Impact, and essentially we said, hey, you have this great idea, go plan it yourselves, because I'm not a planner. And so we wrote a memorandum of agreement, gave them kind of a chunk of money, and we have a video. Generations. My name is Jason Seiler, and I'm a Brownfields coordinator at the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. Thanks to our congressional leadership, the Brownfields program has received an unprecedented influx in funding assistance that we can use to help redevelop underutilized properties. In addition, we are lucky to have great partners across Montana that are looking to bring new life to historic treasures such as the Ming Theater.
We've been involved in kind of the community development side of the Ming Theater project for going on 4 years now. In 2023, we met with the Helena Symphony, and they were interested in taking a look at this building as a possible new home. At this time, we were really struggling as an organization to find funding that could fund planning. We reached out to DEQ, and we were able to receive $100,000 to support planning efforts, looking at how not only to reuse the building, but how to financially support it and sustain it.
It's renovating spaces that is unlike anything in this state, an existing small opera house turn of the century. And what Brownfields is also doing that creates an incredible narrative for fundraising and for community excitement is that the Helena Symphony started in 1955. It's a regional professional orchestra. We're about to enter our 7th decade. And before we were the Helena Symphony in 1955, we were the Helena Little Symphony, which was a small community, basically string ensemble. Before we were the Helena Little Symphony, we were the Ming Opera House Orchestra. We were the resident orchestra in this building in the 1880s. Fast forward, when the Shriners took possession of this building, they outgrew this building and they built what is now the Helena Civic Center, which is our current performance hall. So not only is there a thread of our history going back to this, to the 1880s, we then bookend because our current home is the Helena Civic Center, a Shriners social hall. We would be returning to what became a Shriners social hall. So I love this narrative thread that gets the community excited, that shows that the Helena Symphony is part of the history of the fabric, and so is this building. And this building is largely forgotten by the vast majority of people of this city.
So one of the great advantages we have in this project is DEQ stepped in even before we were involved, and they did a lot of the assessment of the building for hazardous materials. Having that done and having their funding has allowed us to go way farther in the design process and in the investigation process of how feasible this might be than we normally would have done. I think one of the really exciting things about this project is part of this process has been really to delve into a vision for the facility. It's really revealed just the incredible potential of this space, and we're really excited to see how this project might move forward in the future.
You know, Helena has such a rich history. We have so many beautiful historic buildings, and we're really trying to promote revitalization and activation of some of these currently vacant or underutilized spaces in the downtown core. We have such a rich artist community in Helena, and so our hope with this project is to support, you know, that really artistic side of our community as well.
For every dollar spent on the arts, $10 goes into the community. We know this in every community. It is one of the best economic drivers of any community, small and large, is the performing arts. And if it wasn't for the Brownfields, none of this would happen. So the $100,000 or more that's being spent from Brownfields is going to potentially create a multi-million-dollar project that changes the life of a community. That's a pretty great investment.
So, again, this wouldn't have happened without the bipartisan infrastructure law, and this is thinking beyond that, what you can do. And so all these videos are posted on the webpage, DEQ's Brownfields webpage, to kind of inspire you guys and say, see, they did it here, let's do it at this next one. And so I don't know, so we can quickly do a quick through. Ron, I don't know if you want to come up and say what we did, meant or has meant to the symphony, or chairman, Helena Symphony. Putting him on the spot.
Yes, you are, but I kind of knew you would. Hi, everyone. This has been an incredible opportunity. I'd like to say this wasn't your grandmother's PAR, because what we did is we took it to the next level and we got an operational study out of this. So it started out as, I think, about 80,000 in funding, and then Jason, thank you very much, was able to get us another 20 to give us around $100,000, but I think ultimately we got much more value than that for the money, because we got a full operational feasibility study out of it, which actually demonstrated to the board that we can actually do this, that it can generate the revenue, and that it can actually become feasibly become a home for the symphony, but just not a home for the symphony, but a center for the arts. And that's kind of what we wanted to demonstrate with the board, that this was actually possible to do this. So combined operational feasibility with the engineering feasibility that went into it. There's a win-win-win here. So a win for the symphony, a home for the symphony. It's a win for the community, the county, the city, but also for the arts in general, because part of the discussion that we had was involving all of the arts-related strategic partners in the community. So there was a lot of transparency, a lot of discussion. We actually wanted to involve and bring everybody into this discussion, and we really, should this come to fruition, share it with everybody. For example, with Myrna Loy, there are times where they might need a space that could actually hold 500 people. So it could be every quarter, we would have a kind of this would be Wednesday at Myrna Loy at the meeting, every 3 months or so for a special performance. And with the residents that could be created to house people as well, and a general facility that could drive revenue, which would be weddings and many other things that this could be used for. We put together and conceived something that was really holistic and shared as part of the community in general. So we were really pleased to be part of this. Not thinking this is not just about the symphony, but it's much bigger than that. So thank you again, Jason and Ryan.
Ron, thank you for that perspective. So what you've been seeing is kind of the results of the preliminary architecture report and the renderings that were provided. So what you're sitting in is actually not a finished product. This is gonna be, it will be transformed. The idea is to continue to evolve, transform into a more usable space, but it will also have, it will be occupied, more thoroughly, I guess, and there will be potentially artist residence down upstairs, potentially market, real retail, on the first floor. These will be rented rooms, and the big question is like, well, how much? We always ask about how much, in the Brownfields, well, how much is the cleanup, but this actually allowed us, like, all that visioning, all that work, would be roughly 30 million. And that's a specific number that the symphony needed to know. It's like, okay, what are we looking for? What are we actually looking at? And so we did a conceptual cost estimate, and then one of the things that came out of the study is there would actually be a savings for the symphony because they're currently renting offices and storage, and so that would be savings of about 100,000 a year. So that's not quite 30 million, but still significant. We looked at activation, how it can be utilized. So that was the main. This is the event hall, which is downstairs. Next one. There's also going to be meeting spaces. And then we provided a performance. Year one, how much money is going to be generated versus how much is going to be expended. And roughly, it was going to be expenses and revenue pretty much equal out, which is, as a nonprofit, that's kind of, I mean, obviously you want to make more money, but hitting that zero expenditures is pretty awesome. And then we also did some 5 years. So and the same kind of thing with the expected interest and generate money. So pretty. I'd never been through this before. This project before. It was pretty inspirational, to say the least. Just thinking about what the fact that we were actually given the tools to make those kind of decisions. And with the idea at the end is this could be a beacon for arts and if you see the lights on, being at night, kind of see it kind of throughout the city. It's like, oh, something's going on with me. Let's go check it out and see what happens. And bringing that light back into it. So thank you, Brian. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, the Symphony. This was a great project, and we're really excited to be able to work with you guys. So that's kind of thinking beyond phase one. Phase two, we're going to do real quick. What is up next? Perfect.
That was great. Thanks, Jason, and thanks KSC Tab for inviting me to participate in this workshop. My name is Rolly Wellsbach. I'm a consultant from Brownfields, and I have 20 years of experience in consulting. Most of that has been in the Brownfield arena. It's something I'm passionate about. And my topic here is going to be cleanup planning in between two different reuse case studies, this main theater where we're at, and then Matthew, I understand, from Hamilton will present one as well. I have this couple of slides there. So yeah, go ahead to the next slide. So cleanup planning is the overall topic. This is an outline of the different things that I'm going to be talking about here. Just a background towards what is cleanup planning and why would you want to do it? Why don't we just get to the chase and jump in and start digging dirt and removing asbestos, etc. Types of cleanup planning, different names, terminology, ways it can be funded. And then a special topic that I wanted to throw in there, it's a little more tangible, is removing unwanted features from brownfield sites, and a little wrap up about time. And for this overall presentation, some of you are new, you'll just hear some acronyms, some different terminology as an introduction. Some of you who are fairly experienced, you might see something in here about how you might fit in cleanup timing and some money that you already have. And you can go into that if you haven't already. And then those of your old hands will be able to see a little pointer. I know I keep liking to show up to Brownfields conferences because I always learn something. So this is kind of just a visual here to illustrate the usefulness of cleanup planning. The top one is a whole bunch of puzzle pieces. And if you just run ahead and say, okay, let's get these all straightened out as fast as we can so we can move ahead, you might miss a real easy opportunity to make something fit better by forcing a solution. So there's a puzzle piece that just went in the spot next to where it really should go. Or else you might start throwing things together, start cleaning things up as it comes available without any view toward the end picture. You have an expensive, complicated cleanup that may actually even be dangerous or ineffective in the end, like all these different plugins, daisy chain. So cleanup planning helps you see these easy opportunities to maybe hit multiple goals at the same time that in hindsight you would have missed if you hadn't planned ahead, and not to make it a bunch of patched together solutions that end up making it more expensive. Importance. So you get to identify your goals. Who's going to be protected? You want to protect every type of land use, or just a commercial use and not residential, which might be easier if you avoid residential. And then what exposure routes need to be removed? Are you just trying to protect the building from vapor, or do you need groundwater, for example? And that'll really affect the cost and the scale of the cleanup. Evaluate the impact on the site reuse. And all my slides are not just text like this, but is there an initial or phased reuse option where we want to clean up the waterfront portion of the site, the rest can come later, saying, do all areas or parcels of the site have a cleanup need, or are some already clean? And you want to get rid of any buildings in this process. You can estimate costs, which is sort of self-explanatory, right? You can know that's usually fun. Look at schedule constraints, such as a preferred season when this should be done, such as when school is not in session, or an excluded season. You can't do this when during the symphony's high season, something like that. And is there a final deadline? We need to have this done by October 1st, 2025. That's when the planning runs. It provides an opportunity to involve stakeholders formally. We're trying to make a plan that says, okay, these are the options we want to potentially look at for this building. Do you like these? We have a brief little, usually not that technical document that can involve the owner. Sometimes Brownfield owners say, this is a lot to me, don't ever talk to me about this building, but you can bring them in. Is there a developer, local government stakeholder, or community members such as trails or open space advocates that you could have a document that you use to organize the discussions. The last one here. Get a common vocabulary. What do you mean by abatement? What do you mean by contamination? What do you mean by receptors? And then a set of likely options. What that can do then is avoid sort of this circular discussion where one person has one priority, another one has a different priority, but they don't have a set of, what do you like better, A, B, or C, or a modified version of D. Helps focus the discussion. So here's an example of interesting site that a lot of thought went into. How could this be reused? It's Falls construction. In Great Falls, you can see at the top of the little graphic there, it's the Missouri River, it's waterfront property. The road on the left is the highway heading out of town, so a major bridge. The other road is a historic bridge that they've been working on integrating into their trail network and making a loop of trail throughout Great Falls. That comes into the site. And this site, these are little grids that we sampled for lead and other metals. This whole area in red, which is the site, was built on coal ash. They're basically the land that's there is made of coal ash, but it's been used as a construction company for 2 generations. It has a rail that comes into it and multiple small petroleum releases. And so what we found looking at this to start with is that I don't know if you can see it, but there's some bright green on the right side. That's where there's high lead concentrations. And so we thought, that's where they have their shop and their office and their fenced in lay down yard for all their equipment. That's where all the lead is. But that's all commercial, light industrial. We don't really even intend to change the use right now. But what we really want to focus on is the area on the left, and that doesn't have any bright green indicating lead contamination. So they are able to write a materials management. We were able to write a materials management plan and built a new bank on that and sold that end of the property. And then we wrote this summary of the data that was used for a long-term lease as is of the rest of the property. So the left part was reused with just a simple plan about what you got to do when you run into coal ash when you're digging the foundation. And the right side, they just had to summarize the data so they could commit to a long-term lease. And the site owner was quite happy and was able to get the next use for this property after their family's construction. Next one. So there's two main types, the way that I think about it, of cleanup planning. One is looking at your options, evaluating alternatives, and then one is designing the project once you pick it. Next slide. So, evaluation of alternatives. There are different terminologies that you use, types of these type of documents. The top one there is the one that EPA often requires, an ABCA, analysis of Brownfields Cleanup Alternatives. There's also evaluation called a feasibility study, which is done for mine remediation or reclamation, which is a lot of what the Samantha's program is oriented towards from DMRC. A remedial alternatives analysis, or RAA, is required on some Montana petroleum sites. And then a remediation proposal is part of the Voluntary Cleanup and Redevelopment Act, or VCRA, process for voluntary cleanup. So those are all the same type idea, where you're trying to have a set of alternatives that you're choosing between. And sometimes when you use this funding to do cleanup planning, it can meet a regulatory requirement or a required step before cleanup in the life of your site. Some example evaluation factors that you'll probably be using are degree of protectiveness. Does it fix it all the way, or are there still some concerns? The technical implementability. Is this even possible to use this technique, or is there something in the way? Is this not even going to work? Not working that well? Regulatory requirements and compliance. For instance, we've had sites where you might have some sediment restrictions near a river. And so you have to consider what we're going to do. Is that going to negatively impact the restricted area along the stream? Cost, so which option has the least cost for the most benefit? And then permanence. Is this going to be then fixed forever and we never have to worry about it? It's just in the van. Ooze back in from the neighboring soil and not fixed. Slide. So that was the first step, is type terminology and types for evaluation and ways, the factors that might go into the evaluation. And these are a couple different ideas about designs for the project. You have plans for regulatory review saying these are the steps that we're going to go through. And then you have procurement documents. Those are more targeted towards who you're going to hire to actually do the cleanup. And all these different things I'm talking about can be funded by Brownfields funding. Cleanup planning is interesting in the Brownfields world because it's in this overlap between the assessment types of funding and the cleanup types of funding, and it's covered by both. So almost every type of Brownfields funding can fund cleanup planning. And then tribal and state environmental authorities who have 128A programs, they're called, they can do the full gamut assessment and planning. Cleanup planning, all these different things I'm talking about can be covered under most of them. So different names for these plans are cleanup plan, remediation work plan, remedial action plan. There's often involved an element of meet, schedule, and then the procurement documents, those often can be, have a public process that goes along with them or has to come right before them, where you present to the public your preferred option and then you send it out to bid. In the corner there is an excerpt from a bid document that shows a bunch of different surfaces that have different types of asbestos. Excellent. So how can this be funded? On the federal level, you have assessment grants can cover it, site-specific cleanup grants can cover cleanup planning from 28A, and revolving loan fund. And Jason wanted me to mention, those of you who have a revolving loan fund, you can either have a borrower or sub-grantee use this money to fund cleanup planning, or you can ask your environmental professional, right under your own internal costs, one of these cleanup planning documents that can help whoever's going to borrow money get lined out on exactly what the best option is and how much it is. At the state and local level, we have Samantha's DNRC Reclamation and Development Grants Program. We have planning grants. We have a Petro Fund can fund remedial alternatives analysis or RAA. Sometimes they can, some of their funding can be used towards a cleanup plan that might be more expanded to meet EPA requirements and partially funded by the Petro Fund. Site owners sometimes are willing to kick in, and local government as well. Sometimes the stakeholder in rebuilding funds so they can fund them. So I have two slides here on planning for removal and then wrap up. Some features you can remove or plan to remove. On a petroleum site, you can remove fueling systems. This is often done with an assessment grant. And when you're doing that, just be alerted that there are some short time frames that you're required to report if you find a release or if you discover a tank that you didn't know there was there or an additional tank. For instance, on discovering the dirty dirt, the report to the ministry in order to maintain full eligibility for pitcher, for example. Another thing you can do with cleanup planning, you can plan to remove buildings to access contaminated soil below. So the analogy for that is, you know, if you're going to dig at a fueling station, obviously you need to remove the pavement. Obviously you need to remove oftentimes the canopy of the fueling dispensers. Sometimes you even need to remove the building that's next to the and then on hazards in buildings, which is usually the most common thing that's done in addition to petroleum on brownfields cleanup, you can demolish buildings that have asbestos if they're structurally unsound or unsafe, or if demolition is the most cost-effective option and it's non-friable. There are certain types of friable asbestos that your DEQ doesn't allow you to, smash the building unless it's abated because of the likelihood of listed asbestos. The other thing is, and you may be wondering, what's the deal with this picture here on the right? Pigeon waste is a common issue in old abandoned buildings. And this is the Rocky Mountain building in Great Falls. You can see that curve on the top where building is basically missing. And you can't quite see it, or you can imagine a couple little heads poking up there. That building was full of pigeons, full of a ton of pigeon waste, and they keep procreating and keep doing their business. And what we're able to do is say that, digging the mounds of stuff off the floor is necessary and needs actually some of the same respiratory equipment as the people who go in and scrape up the asbestos containing pile. So that's an option for getting rid of them. And when do we do this? So I have these little icons on the right. Looking ahead is the initial evaluation. Where's the problem? Is there an initial area that can be addressed first? And then the middle one is planning for funding. We're sort of a handoff. We know what we want to do, but how we're going to pay for it. Grant writing, evaluation of funding options with the bank or the local government like the county and site owner. And then the last one is the stopwatch. Okay, time to go time, immediately pre-clean, getting the bids, figuring out logistics, moving right to that starting. And so, thank you very much. Take the next slide. That's all I had here. I don't know if you have any questions, but, please feel free to contact me anytime by cell here or by email or, have any comments, questions. 15 minutes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Matthew Rohrbach. I'm with the city of Hamilton, the city planner there. And it's kind of a good follow-up to Willie's presentation. We're going to talk a little bit about a project we did in Hamilton. It's built from DEQ and EPA, our old town hall. It's kind of there. So we have our historic Hamilton Town Hall. It was kind of looks like the first building built in Hamilton there in 1906. At one point now was library, city hall, police, fire. Library, they built the Carnegie Library across the alley in 1915. City Hall Police left in 1990, the Oaks Lodge. So by 1990, the fire department was left. A great place for a fire hall, but as you can see, really wasn't conducive to housing large fire trucks and a more modern fire department. So the city's really been looking at building a new fire hall for a number of years. That effort really ramped up in 2019, 2020, which was a great time to do a big construction project. But, you know, hindsight. So knowing we were going to build this new fire hall, the question became, what are we going to do with the old town? So here's the old town hall. You can see kind of the back of that picture, that little building sticking up. That's the Carnegie Library. That's where the Bitterfeld Library is located. They had expressed interest in moving to that building. And then you have the back vehicle bays. That's one story. That part, that's non-historic. And then you can see that little alley that's kind of filled in with the vehicle bay, between the old town hall and the Mason building. Oddly enough, the Masons are private. So I'll go back. So as I mentioned, we were looking to build the new fire hall. We had this kind of budget in mind when we started planning in 2019. COVID hits, all the supply chain, labor issues, and that price just skyrocketed. So there's a lot of budgetary concerns, and there's a lot of people that simply just said, let's sell the old, sell that building, put that money together in a fire hall. There are some folks who were looking at, okay, let's see how the library can maybe use that building, maybe sell the other portion of it if they can't use it all. And then there was another contingent, and was spearheading this effort is, let's step back and let's look at how can this building be used. We could go sell this building, but there was a concern they could enter into a period of this kind of vacancy, disinvestment, like a lot of our historic structures. So the city council chose to take a step back and really kind of look at a reuse feasibility assessment, you know, and really still having the ability to sell a building depending on what should happen. So we really wanted to figure out what could this building be used for? What sort of demands out there, and physically, how can we transition into some sort of adaptive reuse or some sort of public use? And we really want to go to the community and see what are they, you know, this is kind of the foundation of Hamilton's first main building built in our city. It's really the public's building, so figure out what they would have done with this building, considering they own it. And then also we figured it's a 1906 building, fire department's been there for over 100 years. We were pretty certain there was some level of contamination, and we didn't know what, so we wouldn't figure that out. And then also start to look at some options for the library. They had expressed some interest in possibly expanding. They're really kind of, they have needs that go outside of their original Carnegie Library, but they wanted to stay in that little Carnegie Library. So we're trying to figure out, is there a way they could use part of that space and then the other part can use for something else? And then, as I mentioned, local funding was very limited. I think between the library and the city, we had like $20,000, and we were naive enough to think, like, yeah, we can get a feasibility in a PA or with this. When we started getting bids on that, we were like, oh no, we're not even close. So that's where Brownfields came, and I am completely new to Brownfields, knew nothing about Brownfields. I knew the term about 2 years ago when Jason and Brandon came down from Bitterroot and talked to myself and the Valley County Economic Development Authority. And we're like, kind of gave us the rundown of what Brownfield is, bring it to a fire resistance meeting. And I was thinking, that's so great. Then it just time went by and I kind of lost sight of it. And then we started doing this process. Kind of thought back to that meeting, I contacted Jason and I was like, hey, Brownfield's building this firewall project, this town hall project? Yes, absolutely. So I went to this workshop in Great Falls about 2 years ago, and that really kind of kickstarted. So we got a target applied for a targeted brownfield assessment grant, got the phase 2 done, found lead-based paint around the windows, some asbestos, not a ton, but it was certainly there. Luckily, we were worried there was going to be some PFAS and forever chemicals, fire retardant. Luckily, that wasn't found, so we looked down there. And then with that phase 2 in hand, we really wanted to look at, okay, now we know there's contaminants, how can we move this a step further and figure out what do we do with this building? So we got some funding from Jason at DEQ, who did that memorandum of agreement to get a PAR/feasibility analysis. And then around that time, EPA originated Greg and his team came through with some help to do a reuse assessment. Both those processes were independent of one another, but they came together at the same time. So they were both coordinated. Next slide. With that reuse assessment, that really helped us provide a foundation for that future work we developed in PAR. EPA brought in a bunch of national experts to do this work all over, looked at kind of what's the market condition and everything we can support. Everybody wanted firehouse group. I mean, there's firehouse breweries all over the country. I didn't know, but everybody came to visit, and they want to do it. And what we found out is, in Hamilton, there's not a strong commercial investment, especially for historic structures. So as much as people wanted that, and so that research found that we can sell this building, somebody might buy it with a great idea, but again, get into that period of kind of disinvestment and kind of vacancy because returns aren't going to be there. It was also a purpose-built town hall in 1906. There's this beautiful staircase right when you walk in that's about this steep, so obviously not ADA accessible. So any sort of public use is going to need to be upgraded. It's not really easy to turn into a restaurant, a brewery, a hotel, how we think of that nature. So that really kind of gave us an idea of what our constraints were for how that building could be reused. And it started to then initial public engagement with our key stakeholders, developers, banks, not community bank. Next slide. And that led us to the American Architecture Report. We knew going into it, we wanted a really robust public engagement campaign. So our architects told us, I think this is the most public engagement they've done at any PAR, which is what we want. Public in Hamilton is really engaged. They care a lot about their history of what's going on. So we went out to them early on to figure out what do we want to do with this building. We're also very transparent with here are our concerns. We're not just over the firehouse groups, no firehouse hotels, none of that. We came up with 3 reuse options using a advisory committee made up of some key stakeholders, members of the city, downtown association, some local architects and engineers. We came up with 3 reuse options using that reuse assessment as that framework to go to the public. First was the City Hall library co-location. So when City Hall moved back in 1990, police department left about 20 years later. So right now in City Hall in Hamilton, we have 6 employees and an 18,000 square foot building. My view is phenomenal. I don't need that much space. So we were kind of looking at, we don't need to be in this massive building. We could move back to the old town hall. And the library could use the back half of that, expand in that space, and have this co-location. We also looked at doing some sort of community-oriented mixed use, so nonprofits, community organizations, daycare, things of that nature. City would retain the building, lease it out to these groups. And then we also look at City Hall libraries. Go to the next slide. So you can see, this is kind of what I call the city campus. The city owns the library building actually, but it's got a library construction on it. So this would be taking the library and moving it into the current City Hall, which as much room space and it's parking, that's kind of their big needs. The city would move back to the old town hall, and then we don't know. So that was kind of a little bit of a hack idea. These were the options that were presented to the public. And next slide. Public overwhelmingly chose the City Hall Library co-location. I think there was a few things driving this. One, the library, people love the library. They wanted to make sure they had space, and also historic preservation. I think it was really came out through this process that people cared about this building from the perspective that it's part of our history. It's really one of the most important structures in town, right in the heart of downtown. People not only wanted to preserve it, but they wanted to make sure that as it was preserved, they had access. So we sold it on the private market. That the public could lose that access, even if it was restored. So I think people really keyed into that, which I think was a surprise. So what the PAR really allowed us to do, I mean, kind of went through with the names, allowed us to do that public engagement, key in on that preferred alternative, but then look at all the laundry list of things. So as part of that team, we had a bunch of engineers on board, looking at mechanical, electrical, lead, elevator, second needs egress, and really kind of outline that daunting list of improvements that we've done, but it gave us a clear picture. So here you can see the building again. So as part of this, the recommendation would be those back vehicle ways, tear those down, build a new structure that would connect the library to the city hall, an elevator in there, tear down that little alley piece between the Mason and the Sonic Lodge, an historic structure. Both those were built either 1950 or 1980, so they're not technically part of that historic registered structure. That would be kind of a public space, public alley, kind of activated alley between City Hall and the Sonic Lodge, and kind of create this City Hall library campus where you have a shared meeting space, office space for library programming, and then also there's a way you can kind of dig out underneath the firewall space for library collections. So most of the new space would be for the library. So here's kind of a rendering of what that could look like. So I think some of the outcomes for us is it really laid out, helped us get a realistic idea of what could be done. Right? And stepping back from grand visions that were, good in theory, but really realize that we building can't support that, and financing is not there on the private side or the public side. And I think it did a good job of articulating this and bringing that back to the policymakers, our decision makers, for them to understand, hey, our public doesn't want to sell this building. They want to keep this building and they want to see it public use. And that really helped build that support at that policymaker level. And they've really shown that support going forward. We just adopted PAR this last August, and we're starting to move forward on implementation. So that kind of push to just sell the building and be done with it, it's really died down. And then established a massive budget, but it's something that we know, I think you mentioned with me, right? It's a big line item. For us, it's about $20 million, but it gives us something. And then it also set us up to apply for different funding opportunities. We applied for a historic preservation grant, we applied for CDBG, just got good news, we made it barely above the funding line for historic preservation, so I suspect I'll be back here in a couple months to make sure it's there. But it's kind of really allowed us to start chasing other dollars, do this in an incremental fashion. It also opened up a lot more questions that we don't have the answers to, we're trying to chase down right now. So go to the next slide. Here's again that city of all properties. Jason and Pauline have helped us with phase 2 on all these buildings with the exception of the parks department. So if we move out of City Hall, we're trying to figure out what do we do with this mid-century old Ellis Lodge. It's got a community room in it and the public loves it. So now we're kind of back to square one. Well, what do we do with the newer old City Hall? So we might end up in another kind of similar situation. We're kind of looking right now to, can we move the staff that we have in City Hall to the Parks Department building, to open that building, turn City Hall up to sell some sort of adaptive reuse? That's where we are now. We have a lot of questions that we don't have the answers to, but we're moving forward. So we're trying to get more detailed design for that City Hall library co-location project. Working with the library, we know this is going to be a phase or a 5-10-year project. And I think just going into it with that expectation, managing that expectation on the public and private side, helps us settle in for the long haul, start to develop a phase plan, try to tie funding mechanisms to those different phases. And we're trying to figure out kind of where does that cleanup come in. We've worked with Wayne and some of the folks who've done the phase twos, and we know we don't want to just go do cleanup right now. We know we have to do demolition work or work later and have to do kind of 2 layers of cleanup. So I'm learning a lot about this the last 2 years and continue to learn more, but we're trying to kind of figure out how to layer that in. And then identifying those other options for other city buildings. That's it.
Yeah, so if there are any questions, and just let this feel warning for us, and if you do ask for funding, we will make it come speak. Yeah, or donate your room, so hopefully next workshop.
Yeah.
Money,
Get it all fixed up.
being him. But so any questions? So again, this session wants to kick this off as kind of more inspirational. To kind of start thinking what you got and how. It's easy. Yeah.
Okay, well, they got the fun one, and now, Tom, and Dean and I get the not so fun one, but it is a necessary step, so. Do you wanna come on? And you don't wanna stand while I'm talking, or you can ad lib too. So the next topic is going to talk about how to find a contractor, how to find a cleanup contractor, issuing, soliciting an RFP, what that looks like, all the do's and don'ts. So I'll cover that, and then hear from Tom, our big guy, about their processes, they've gone through this a few times. So, and I will preface this, this information is a little dry, but it is what it is, and some of the content's a little heavy, so at any point there's questions, you don't have to wait till the end, just raise your hand, and we can answer those. Same with all of our wonderful folks online, if you have a question as we're going through this, please just put it in the chat, and we'll go from there. So, for those of you that, let's say you're successful and you get an EPA Brownfields grant, whether it's an assessment, multi-purpose, revolving loan fund, what do you do? What's next? What's that next step after you receive that award letter and you're so excited? Well, the immediate next step, 2 biggest things, is working on your work plan to get it approved with your EPA project officer, and then hiring a contractor, qualified environmental professional, or your cleanup contractor, whatever that may be. And you can reach out to Tab. We can provide assistance. We do have some templates that we've created that kind of help you just think about what information you need to include, all of that, and we'll cover that as we go through this. So how do you know what do you do? There's 2 main ones, and I think they're used interchangeably quite a bit, request for proposal versus request for qualifications. Can we combine them? Which one do I need to do? And so kind of a way to think about it, it really depends on your project, your scope, and what you want to do. But proposals are usually if you, like maybe have a single project, you're looking just for one consultant, You can issue an RFP if you want to maybe hire multiple, let's say you have a multi-phase project, or you have a lot of money, maybe you have a multi-purpose grant, you might need to hire more than one consultant or contractor. Maybe issuing a request for qualifications, so you can really evaluate the various consultants and contractors, make your decisions, and go from there. EPA, since you are receiving federal funding, does have procurement guidelines in 2 CFR 200. And this is very heavy content, and it's a lot of information. They do have some fact sheets that kind of break it down. But anything that you need to know about procuring a contractor is located in 2 CFR 200. One of the things to keep in mind that we'll cover a little bit, I have an example, is evaluating costs as part of your selection criteria is a requirement to meet the federal procurement guidelines. So, what is the deal with 2 CFR 200? That is a very good question. It essentially dictates and governs how you successfully procure a contractor. It's intended to streamline the guidance, reduce burden, follow this, check all your boxes, and you'll be good to go. And just to make sure that you are utilizing the federal funds in an appropriate manner. But what does that really mean? And so the next few slides, we just pulled out a few highlights that are kind of key questions that we get asked for a lot, of things that we see as we're helping grantees and communities through this process. One of the key things is just to have a good framework, a process and a plan. Most local governments, municipalities, they already have a process for securing a contractor. It may not be Brownfields related, but it's using local funds, taxpayer dollars. They want to know that if the city or local municipality is hiring somebody, that is done in a very meaningful manner. So I usually tell people, check with what you already have, check with the finance people, check how do you hire other people to do work outside of Brownfields. And they might already have a process in place for you. If you have anybody that is a relationship to the person issuing the RFP or anything like that, you need to disclose that, and they're typically not allowed to participate. There's exceptions to every rule, and it's just acknowledging that, understanding that, and figuring out how to do that. 2 CFR 200, there is I think a little bit of misnomer that you are required to use BB, MB, or DBEs. It's not required. They definitely encourage that you solicit proposals from those type of organizations, but that can be done in a variety of different ways. And ultimately, they just may not exist in your area or your region, or they are not the most qualified person to help you with your project, and that's okay. So just keep that in mind. And a couple other key points here that have come up more recently from the EP Brownfield's perspective. If you are already working with a contractor, say that you solicit an RFP for someone to help write your grant, and that's all that they did, they helped write your grant. If you get selected for award and that contractor does not help you develop your work plan, it's perfectly acceptable and fine for them to respond to your RFP or RFQ. If your hired grant contractor consultant did help with your work plan, then that excludes them from responding to RFP or RFQ. So just keep that in mind, because you might be working with the contractor to develop your grant, kind of do's and don'ts, things they can and cannot do. The other thing that has come up recently is you do not want to include any language in your RFP that would maybe restrict or limit someone from responding by using keywords. Brownfields is now considered a keyword, and which I think is a little silly. So, but it is what it is. And so if you are granting and you receive a Brownfields grant as part of, soliciting or as part of the qualifications, the, rating criteria that you want to use to evaluate, Brownfields experience that language cannot be in your RFP to meet, CFR 200 requirements. Now, you can include language such that they are familiar with kind of the EQ regulatory requirements. It can include things like that. They can be familiar with environmental assessment. They can be familiar with data planning. You just can't specifically use the word Brownfields in your RFP or if you're a brownfield recipient. I know, it seems so.
Is that true for that RFP or just in your qualification?
I mean, if you're issuing an RFP at one Brownfield, that's a good question. But those online can be asked if that is throughout the RFP or just qualifications. It's a little bit of both. I mean, you're issuing this because you were awarded Brownfields grant, so you can't take Brownfields out of your title. But it's more of in the description of the proposed work that you're doing. And I think we can do that on the slides. But if you're talking about, you're an assessment grantee, for example, and you're doing an environmental site assessment for that work, and you lay that out in your scope of work in the RFP, you wouldn't say Brownfield site assessment or environmental assessment on Brownfield sites. You would just say, familiar with like being phase 1, ESA, phase 2 environmental site assessments. So you can include Brownfields in the title because again, that's your grant, but you can't include Brownfields as a keyword throughout the narrative when you are describing the scope of work that you want to contribute to. The question was, yeah, is there a list of keywords? No, there's not. It's the best thing to do is be generic specific, because you want it to be clear on the expectations so people can respond and help them. And then when you're evaluating them, again, you're having all the information. And that's where TAB can come in and help. We can review a draft RFP for you and kind of keep an eye out for those keywords, or maybe you want to reword this slightly. We don't have a list of keywords. I would say most of our experience comes from working with grantees where they went through the process. I don't think it's honestly as big of a deal in Region 8. I haven't seen a lot of feedback in some of the other regions we work in. They've made them actually go out and read it. I've actually seen that. So we're learning and then we're just sharing our knowledge up front with you guys. Who is telling what? Who's telling me that? EBA regional folks. Please. Yeah, I know. But I'm gonna talk about policy. I'm just reading this to see what. Yeah, I know. I think some of it came from there. We're really trying to, with all the infrastructure, all the money, get it out that everybody, communities, maybe contractors that are trying to get into this field. It came from, at the regional level, not from headquarters. Can you repeat what John said for the online? Oh, yeah. The question was who was saying that Brownfield is the keyword in your RFP? And it has come from individual regional EPA offices. All right, other things to think about. So there are 3 types of procurement methods. There's the informal procurement method, the formal, and then the non-competitive. So the informal procurement method, if you have a small purchase or contract where you're gonna be spending less than $1,000, you don't have to go out, you don't just listen an RFP or RFQ. You can just hire someone to do that work, to do whatever it is. This is, I would say a lot of things that fall under this category is the grant writing piece and things like that. You can go and do. The formal process is where you do need to issue an RFP. You have that competitive bid, requires a public notice. You can ask for sealed bids for your proposal. And the evaluation criteria that you will be judging or basing your decisions on needs to be part of the RFQ document. And that is, I would say, where a 98% of grantees for Brownfields grant funding is going to fall in that formal procurement method. And then the non-competitive procurement is in certain scenarios where there's like contractors or the type of project that it is, it's something very specialized, something very unique, and there's just not that cool, the contractors pull from. With that, but most of you, I'm going to say, yeah, if you are awarded a Brownfield grant, you're going to find yourself in the formal procurement method. So again, I already kind of touched on the first bullet point here. You do want to try to advertise to BB organizations. One way to do that is to just make it accessible, post it online. If you know maybe organizations that fall under this category, you can submit. You can reach out to them directly through email or some other type of correspondence. Maybe there's a local organization that has a list that you can send them out to. It's just really trying to focus, making sure that the opportunity is presented widely into all various types of entities and organizations. You guys can read all this, I'm just looking to see what else I haven't really see a lot. As part of, procurement and contract modifications, cost is always a big thing that needs to be considered. And one reason why, we are covering this is, and it has happened more recently, I think there's just more scrutiny because there's more funding, more high levels of funding. EPA may request to review your procurement procedures, review it themselves. And if they determine that you didn't follow CFR 200, they can ask you and will essentially make you redo it before you actually get your money. Is there any scenario where they would take your grant away? Kate asked, is there any scenario where they would take your grant away? I have not seen that yet because most people are able to correct the efficiency of their process. So no, it adds more time because the next slide is I don't understand later. EPA also encourages that 30-day notice. So if you've gone, you drafted it, you've gotten a review, you've gone out, it's been posted for 30 days, you go through the review process, you select it. That all takes time. And to start that all over again, that just delays your overall project time. Again, just read through everything, make sure that it's readable, it makes sense, and have to do a review at no cost. If you would like that before you issue it, be kind to the people that are going to be responding and think about the content of page limit. And how much information that you have on, and then on the flip side, you want to make sure that the responses contain enough information for you to evaluate and, provide fair review and good selection, but be kind to yourself too. If you want to limit the number of pages for the responses, 100%. You can do that, and that is strongly encouraged and recommended. Some people will write a book about how to write it. And that's awesome, because they're great. But you might not need to know that at this phase. So some other general best practices when you're drafting your RFP, things to think about, be clear about due dates, submittal requirements. Are you accepting hard copies only? Are you accepting hard and electronic copies? Where are you to submit that information? When are they due? If you're allowing for questions to be answered, where should these questions be directed to? Should they be submitted by a certain time? Where are responses going to be submitted? You know, contact your peers and say, hey, do you have an example of an RFP that we could look at? Or what did you do? What are some lessons learned from you when you went through this process? And again, just be very clear about what you want, what your expectations are from the contractor. So yeah, deadlines, days, provide a brief history. So again, this is where you could include the word brownfields. You recently brownfields, right? You have brownfield sites. I mean, that part's okay, because that's your project. You can't get around it. If you have a budget, sometimes it's a good idea, but I recommend not being overly prescriptive about your budget, but overall, like we have X amount of dollars for assessment, X amount for community engagement. Or on the cleanup, we received a cleanup grant, X amount of dollars, just so the people responding, you know, have a fair sense for the budget that they and the cost that they'll be providing to you. Be very clear on your expectations for the scope of work that you are expecting them to do. Be clear about what the contractor is expected to do versus what you as the grantee city member is going to do. Just make sure those responsibilities are clear and outlined. Be clear on what deliverables you're expecting from them. You know, are they reports? Are they assessments? Are they quality assurance project plans? Just be very specific about the types of deliverables, and if you know the quantity of those deliverables, what is your overall timeline? And again, the selection criteria, how you are going to be evaluating and scoring each of the proposals that are submitted. If you want to, including a map of your community or project area is always good. You have a copy of your work plan or your draft application if you're still working on your work plan. You can provide that as an attachment. If you have a cleanup grant, you have your draft backfill, which you should, because it's a requirement for a cleanup grant. Go ahead and include that. And then anything else that might be specific to you and your organization that would be helpful to them, again, to provide a very useful and full response. What would you like them to provide to you? Be very clear about, again, your submission details. Do you want a cover letter? What information do you want on that cover letter? Resumes. I'm strongly encouraged to include resumes. I also typically, for resumes, put a limit on it. Like 1 or 2 page. Maybe you don't need to send you a book. Just hit the key points. Making sure that they really describe who they are, what they do. They can provide examples is always helpful, references, their approach to your project, and then costs. So from a project perspective, what should RFP or RFQ entail? How the respondent will meet all applicable state and federal regulations for the work that will be done under the contract, how they what their experience is and how they are qualified to do all that work. Are they going to be using any subcontractors? That needs to be clearly laid out, outlined, and how that flow will work. Again, who's responsibility for what? Subcontractor, hired contractor. This is where sometimes using or filling kind of that we need. If they can subcontract with some of those organizations, that's cool. And yeah, what is their experience conducting things? What is their experience completing environmental assessments, not necessarily environmental related, but just overall in general. And then what do they have for their health and safety practices and programs? Here's an overall general timeline that you can follow, or things to think about, especially as you are trying to meet your own deadlines, and getting this in order and ready to go so you can get your grant dollars and hit the ground running. Again, yeah, EPA does recommend posting for 30 days if not possible. That is a recommendation, not a requirement. But it is looked very heavily upon, I will say. Again, making sure when you publicize or advertise, you are trying to hit all the markets. Web page is always good. There's an announcement in a newspaper or however you generally kind of solicit or share information to the public. You can do that. If you have a again, if you know some contractors or people that you want to share directly with, it's perfectly fine for you to reach out to them, but you have to reach out to, we recommend at least 3. You can't just send it to one person and post it on your website for a day. I mean, that's not going to fly. But again, talk to your peers, talk to other people that you know have done this work and say, hey, do you have any recommendations on good contractors or consultants that we can notify and say, hey, here's this opportunity for you to respond to. And if, earlier I mentioned the project work maybe that just kind of outlines the scope of work and services you're expecting. But if you did have a contractor that helped you develop that work plan and they're eligible to bid, you don't want to include it as an attachment because that will give them an unfair advantage. And then they were happy to be selected, you have to start the process all over again. And if you only receive a single bid, that's okay. There's nothing you can do about it. You've met all the other requirements, but then you do have to demonstrate that you negotiated costs with that contractor. How do you go about selecting a contractor, especially if they're maybe not the lowest cost? Again, you just have to demonstrate why you selected them and justify that it was a combination of those qualifications, their experience, how they're going to approach the project, coupled with costs. Interviews aren't required, but they are highly recommended. Sometimes things can come out when you're meeting person to person, face to face, versus just putting a bunch of stuff on paper. If you are going to do interviews, you don't have to interview everybody. A lot of people will do, the top, after they evaluate and score, okay, the top 3 or the top 5 or whatever, we'll get interviews. And make sure you just hold those interviews, in a week. If you are going to hold interviews, that should be part of the RFP, making that clear that, hey, we're going to hold interviews for these top people, and the interviews will be scheduled this week or around this time. So even then, your respondents know to save some time in that general time frame for that. And make sure you are communicating to anybody that responds, whether they're selected. We can talk a lot about those things. It's good to have a selection review committee. And so you want to identify those folks internally. And you want to establish clear criteria for how you're going to be evaluating the proposals you received, the ranking criteria. You have weighted factors, which are part of the guidelines regulations. You want to understand that process. And then just make sure that you're following, and that each individual on your team is all following the same process. If you have any questions about that, some examples have been helpful. So here is an example of just what evaluation criteria might look like and what weight you give to particular, and it's kind of fuzzy, so I'm really sorry about that, you can't really read. But the key point here is, and you want to include this in your RFP, is just think about how you want to score, the proposals, what's important to you. as far as the criteria? Are you going to evaluate their experience, number of years, what their work is like? Are you going to evaluate, their ability? Your criteria, if you are scoring against, should equally match what you're asking them to respond to. Is the easy way to think about it. And then it is encouraged, recommended that you weight to those criteria, and your weighting factor can be anything. This is just an example, pretty common is having weighting factors of 0 to 4. And what that means is for each of the criteria that you will be scoring against, how important is that factor to you? You know, okay, so qualifications and experience is really important. I really want to hire somebody who knows and has that experience. Maybe that's a 4. And then some of the other criteria isn't as important. Maybe that's maybe it's a 2 or a 3, whatever that may be. That's perfectly fine. The one thing to keep in mind is that cost must be at least 25% of weighted criteria. We get a lot of questions about what does that mean. And so essentially you want to take 25% of the total maximum of your scores, and that needs to be how your cost is rated. So in this example, there's a couple different ways to do it. You could actually take the total. So if your ranking is from 1 to 5, and then based on your weighting criteria, so here, like the first one, so the maximum score, if you scored a 5, it had a weight of 3, that would be 15. And then it goes all the way down, and then you would add up the maximum score, which in this case would be 8 points. And 25% of that is 21.25. You divide that by 5 because that's the maximum rating they can get for that. So you know, okay, cost has to be weighted at a factor of 4. So it's a little bit of math that you have to do. Other things that I've seen is just actually taking the total score of the weighted and then taking 25% of that. And usually equals to 62, but that's how you can meet that requirement. All right. Before I pass it off to Tom, does anybody have any questions? Tom. And now Tom's going to share some of his experience with all the RFPs they've issued over the last 10 years.
Well, I'm glad that Maggie took care of all the technical stuff. It's Tuesday at 100 puts me to sleep. As she said, I'm Tom McLean with Big Sky Economic Development. We're a quasi-public organization, started as a trade portfolio and built on top of that. So we have about 25 people that work there. I've been there about 7 years. I've been about a little over 2 years ago, a colleague left and who was doing the Brownfield, so they came to me and was like, hey, you want to do the Brownfield stuff? And I'm like, oh, sure, it means I get an all-expense paid trip to Oklahoma City and August. So yeah, I took that on. So I've been doing it about 2 years, a little over 2 years. Right when I started was when we got our latest assessment grant in 2022. Doing the RFP for that was, I was still in you're drinking from a fire hose stage in 2020. So basically what I did was looked at our past, I had some templates in our previous RFPs and we worked on that. My first question was, why is this thing 20 pages long? And so I did what I could to bring it down. I think I brought it down to like 13 pages, but it was still a lot of boilerplate stuff. But we published that. I think we didn't publish it for 30 days as EPA recommends, but our procedures basically say for 2 weeks, so we published it for 3 weeks. We published it. We have the newspaper of record in Yellowstone County is the Yellowstone County News, which is a small weekly. So we published it there. We also published it in the Billings Gazette, which is a link to the web. We put it on our website. We reached out directly to contractors and consultants that we knew by email or phone, mostly email. We work with our, we have it's Apex now, Apex Accelerated, but it was Peak back then. they have a list of disadvantaged business enterprises that we, so we could reach out directly to some of those that way. So there are different ways we try to get the word out, and that's, so we did our best to get it out. It worked. I mean, we had 5 for our RFP for our assessment grant 2022. We had 5 really qualified consultants respond to that. The way we work it is we have a selection committee, basically that's made up of myself and another staff person. We have our target areas for Brownfields assessment has been two downtown TIP districts. So we included the executive director from each of those on the selection committee. We had some board members on our selection committee, and then we had a representative from the city, basically the city planner. So when the proposals came in, we basically, I sent them out to the review committee. I don't give them any comment. I just send it out. I don't want to influence them in any way. Send it out on the score sheet. They have a few weeks to get that back to me, and we meet, go over I kind of tabulate the scores and put it together in one sheet or 2 sheets that I'll tabulate it by score and also by rank. And then we'll get together and talk about it and see what people thought. In the assessment proposal, we did, like I said, we did an RFP, and that we had a pretty clear, consultant that was. I mean, there was all 5 of them could have done a great job. And it came down to basically 2, but the one kind of stood out. And I think they had all but one that ranked them as the first consultant at the top. So we went ahead and hired that one. Our second experience was with the RFQ. We got an revolving loan fund the next year. We did an RFQ because Snowy Mountain Development, I was at one of these 2023, I think. Snowy Mountain Development has had a thing where they basically hired, I guess they asked for qualifications, they chose the ones that they wanted to work with, and they basically got hired, but they had a stable 3 or 4 different consultants that they could call them different times. We thought about doing it that way because it sounded like it was a really good idea. We ended up not, basically because with the RLF, it was our first experience with an RLF. And we knew we were going to need some handhold, and we knew we were going to need a lot of technical expertise, technical advice. So in a situation where you have several, who do you choose? I'm sure we get the same answer, but that'd be a little confusing for me. Anything else I need to cover?
I'm curious, what about response to that first RFP made them stand out to you? Okay, so one thing I think would be good to talk about is what about the response from the communities that it really stood out? Probably everyone's made it kind of easier to evaluate.
Oh, it was basically their experience. It's, we had 2 firms that were really experienced and had a lot of brownfield experience. I hope we can still ask for that. Next RFP, please check on that, because I don't know how you run an RFP and talk about brownfields RFP, but basically, that also personnel, we did a lot, kind of dug into the resumes, and then basically those 2 factors and cost, they weight the cost factor to 95%. In both our situations, that really wasn't a factor because they all come back really close. We asked for a price list basically, and they're all relatively the same. So unless there's an average one, then you can basically say, no, they're too high. They were all really close. So, you basically taking 25% of your evaluation, gating it, because Most of them are the same, in my experience. Other question?
Okay, so the question from online, is to be repeated. So Sarah Congress asked, she said she knew that DEQ has a contract list. And wondered if DEQ is willing to share that so that people can there are reasons for RFPs against, the DEQ.
So for DEQ, every 7 years, we put out a solicit consultants to all our remediation mission to do a number of different. That's. As good as I said, and so we are more than happy to share this. I think it's usually.
And has your organization used the net or marketing platforms?
I will say no, we don't have it. I would say lessons learned. We'll lean on these guys for their expertise in this. I didn't reach out to them. I didn't think about it, but we as existed and we were a resource as far as the development of the simplified. Didn't.
Yeah, I think you did a good job of putting your and reassessment of the opportunity grant.
So I know we want to support our small town newspapers with the 20-page RFP or even 13-page RFP. Is it acceptable now to pull a small word and just referencing and posting on the RFP?
Yeah, the question is, do you have to put the entire community RFP in a newspaper for workers? Yes, you can. If you want to, that's where some of the details and submission guidelines. I mean, if you have like a repository or page or full copy, yeah, there's the website, you can link, or you can stop by offices, it's going to be available. Yeah, it's perfectly fine. Just the announcement is.
We just published the small column with the link to our website.
The Small Business Administration, SBA, located in DC. I did that and recommend for pretty laws. I also made laws. I worked with some kids and I thought that all this curious if you were experience success when you come to SBA, the later laws.
The question is following good faith effort practices, which is requirements, reaching out to the Small Business Association and who has had success in that. Right at the time, yeah, I can say that's one of those things as long as you document. I mean, you can only do what you can do, and you can't, or people give you information or help you. So what we've seen is as long as you can document that as part of your process, you met that requirement. That should be a good effort.
I did not reach out specifically to the SBA. I reached out internally to our own people. I believe they got theirs to part of a transportation work that I do. I don't know if they still have it, but that's kind of.
And maybe in multiple states, the DOTs where they can sustain a certified DB and WB and ME contractors in the Colorado based is are. If you are from different states and line, there's the persons who identify as maybe BBs and DBs, or through DOT. Any other questions or comments and experiences?
Hate to go back to the keywords. But I'm wondering, when we're speaking to the authors, in certain keywords, we respond to those, and we say that should be a.
The question is, as a respondent to an RFP, can you include, should you include keywords that may not be in the RFP? I would say you could, yes. I mean, it's gonna come down to if they're following the process, what the criteria is that is part of the RFP and RFQ. So, but there's nothing to, if your selection committee is following their criteria and their processes, I mean, that's all outlined in there. So I don't think it hurts you or you. Again, they're following the process. Because yeah, it should be very clear, hopefully, what you're going to be exploring. Jennifer, want to say anything?
No, I have a question.
Yeah.
So as we, if you're going to do a, control hearing, you're going to do a cleanup, RFP, project. When you do an RFP, are you soliciting the contractor to then tell you how to do the cleanup? Or do you generally have an idea of what's going to happen and say it was cheaper for the area? Reason I'm wondering is we'll see tomorrow on the cleaning, what to do, mission RFP, or actual cleanup work, which is the construction part of Brownfields. What happens to our requirements to actually in that now? So my question is, do we do that with solicit contract doing work? Or is it very cost to do what the state is for giving that versus determining that? Material results.
The question is, the timing of including requirements in a cleanup RFP, or how you're going to do, the part of your RFP after you select the contractor and include that part of the respondent. I mean, and I would like to hear from my T's and thoughts. I would say that when you apply for a cleanup grant, you have to have a plan, you have to have an ABCA, you have to have a plan, you generally know what your cleanup options are and what your cleanup plan is going to be. And you also have to then develop a work plan with EPA that is just going to be a translation, a little bit more detail about that. So going into it, you're already going to know what kind of cleanup method is and requirements. But I do think there is some flexibility in the RFP process of who you're going to hire, and maybe they have a different approach or a slightly different thing on a more effective way of doing it. So it's a little bit of both.
We're just having, I agree.
There at minimum speed. That's where you have. So, just reiterating, I agree with what Maggie said, that there is some flexibility there, but having, putting that requirement in your bid specifications, that you're probably big for you, that's where, it's kind of a key portion of it, because all the contractors are going to be competing on that, need to know that. That makes sense. And take advantage, having Jen here from the EPA headquarters is a phenomenal opportunity and resource. So take advantage of that. This is pretty awesome that we have some from DC. I'm trying to see what's great.
I would say, definitely my you can tell them when something is really off the area, and in that, in person getting something advantage in our and doing nothing wrong.
All, everything, all.
So they were just narrating, in a room from experienced folks to include the, bottom requirements as part of the proposal, yeah, the specifications.
Right now,
And also recommended to include, data speed as a requirement. When you're soliciting for. Any other great advice into that question? Okay, all right, well, I think we are a little early, but that's all right. Are there any other questions? No. Oh, great, so we are ready for a break. Yeah, up next, we have consulting with the State Historic Preservation Office, and we have James Strait with Montana. Yeah, with Montana DEQ and. Yeah, okay, there were two names. And we have Samantha. Yep, keep going. Yep, the floor is yours.
Hi, yeah, so like was said, my name is Samantha and I work at the Montana SHPO, or the State Historic Preservation Office, and I'm a review and compliance officer. I've only been there just over a year, so things are still kind of getting set for me, but I'm gonna give a pretty quick general overview of Section 106 and that process, and then James is gonna get a little bit more detailed about going through that process as an agency person and consulting with our office. So Section 106 really comes from the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. The actual Section 106 text is only about a paragraph long, so it doesn't get a ton of detail. But what it does get at is that Section 106 is really meant to encourage preservation. It actually does not mandate it. So the focus is much more on the process rather than the outcomes. And you really see that when you dig into the Code of Federal Regulations for Section 106, it's 36 CFR 800. And that gives a really like a step-by-step playbook on how to go through consultation. So if you're looking for any light reading over the holidays, I would definitely recommend that if this is something that you're gonna be working through. But really, 106 is a 4-step process. It starts with just initiation, where you're kind of seeing if your project would actually constitute an undertaking. And what an undertaking is gonna look like is it's gonna have some sort of federal nexus. So that could be a federal grant, or you're needing a federal permit, or a federal agency is doing a project on federal land. So think Forest Service, BLM projects, things like that. In this first step, you're also going to be identifying who the consulting parties might be and the area of potential effect, which is basically kind of the boundary of your project area. And I guess I'll say when I'm saying when you do this, it will either be a federal agency, a state agency, but sometimes they do delegate their 106 responsibilities to other entities as well. I will say the caveat of that is generally they still retain the responsibility of doing tribal consultations, since that is a government to government responsibility. The next step is going to be looking at identifying and reporting on historic properties within your APE. And then you kind of move into assessing what the effects on those historic properties might be. A historic property is defined in the code as a site. It could be a structure, building, landscape, etc. that's over 50 years of age and is either eligible to be listed on the National Register or is listed on the National Register. And that kind of goes into a whole side tangent, I guess, in terms of, well, how do you know it's eligible, where you're kind of looking at the integrity of the site, but also if it falls within 4 main criterion, which could be association with a historic event, or a broad pattern of history. It could be related to a significant person, or be significant in terms of its workmanship or craftsmanship when it comes to buildings. So it's architecture or its association with a notable architect. And then lastly, it could be significant for its research potential. So then when you're looking at assessing what the effects of this project might be to a historic property, you kind of have 3 main avenues, which would be where no historic properties are being affected. Oftentimes that comes into play when there are no historic properties within the APE itself. And then oftentimes we see a no adverse effect. And then there's an adverse effect. And really the difference between the two is an adverse effect would be inhibiting the site's ability to convey its significance. And a no adverse effect is just a project where it's not doing that. And then the last step, which doesn't always get hit, but that would be resolving any adverse effects. And obviously that only comes into play when there are adverse effects, and that kind of takes the form of a memorandum of agreement or an MOA that just outlines who the players are, what the project is, and what steps are being taken to mitigate the adverse effects on the historic property at hand. I will say also a side tangent, but it's important to note that our office reviews projects across the state. But if a project is taking place on a reservation, that actually would be reviewed by the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. So our office would not look at that at all unless we were asked to by the tribe themselves. But other than that, all those projects would come kind of through our office to be reviewed to just make sure cultural resources are being protected. So that was kind of a lot and really fast, but the 106 process can be simple, but it can also be really nuanced. And what we tell people a lot is it's very project dependent about the specific site and the specific project that's taking place. But our office is always open for questions on any part of that. We're always happy to talk to people. And our website also or the Montana SHPO website has a lot of great guidance on there on how to do this process as well. So I'll hand it off to James.
Hi, everyone. So I'm James Strait. I'm the archaeologist with DEQ. So doing with cultural resources, it's pretty easy to dive down some rabbit holes. So I'm going to try to avoid a lot of rabbit holes. Next slide. Real quick background on me. I did my undergraduate work at Iowa State University, went to University of Arkansas for my graduate work. Moved to Montana in 2001, began working with DEQ in 2009. Thank you. In 2016, I became the kind of de facto archaeologist for all of DEQ. And then this year, they transferred me to the Waste Management Remediation Division, where I get to do basically the same thing, but just for them. So all in all, I've had about 30 years of experience doing archaeological work. So one of the questions you probably have first asking is, why is it that I have to do cultural resources? So it all comes from your T&Cs, from your grant, basically, which references the NHPA, the National Historic Preservation Act. You're complying with that aspect, essentially. You've probably seen that kind of language somewhere in your contract before, so I'm not going to read it for you. So, is this a federal undertaking? Step one, initiate review. Do you have an undertaking? Definition of an undertaking: a project, activity, or program funded in whole or in part under the direct or indirect jurisdiction of a federal agency, including those carried out with federal finance assistance. In other words, if it's a Brownfields activity, it's an undertaking. Note, if there's no federal dollars involved in it, then you don't have to do NHPA. Determine if the undertaking has a potential to cause an effect. So, example of activities that do not have a potential: demolition of non-historic buildings and structures. So, if it's less than 50 years old, then it generally is not something that can cause an effect. Now, small rabbit hole. There is something called a criterion of consideration, which something less than 50 years old can be historic property. Don't worry about that too much. Get your archaeologist, call SHPO. They're going to be able to help you to resolve that if it occurs, but it's not something that happens very often. Just a general question, maybe anybody can think of something, a site, an area less than 50 years old that might qualify?
Yes.
That's older. So the World Trade Center would definitely be something that would be qualified under a criterion of consideration. Let's see, so doing a phase 1 site assessment, that's not going to. Just superficial soil sampling, surface water, monitoring well installations, any of these kind of things. These aren't going to trigger what would be considered an effect, and thus wouldn't necessarily trigger doing a full section 106.
Can I have you stand up there, because this is the camera?
Oh, you must.
You can go all the way to the top so you don't fall down if you want. You can go all the way up if you want.
I like it up here. So no effect. If there's an undertaking, but it's not the type of activity that has the potential to cause an effect on historic properties, then that concludes your section 106 process. The project officer will document the decision through the file and communicates the information to the necessary parties. If there's an effect, so you're doing test pits, soil excavation, capping and covering contaminated soil, building renovations, building demolitions, all of those constitute an effect. Okay. So once you've determined that it actually could have an effect, so this is just a potential for an effect, then you have to ask, is it a historic property? Okay. Is the property building listed or eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places? That's the primary question that you have to ask. So is it older than 50 years? Is the property in an archaeological sensitive area? So is it within a historic district? Say you're in a town. Generally, most of the towns in Montana have some kind of historic district associated with them. Is the site an area where traditional cultural properties are located? Contrary to popular belief, TCPs, which are traditional cultural properties, they can be anywhere. They don't have to be Native American in origin. So if you have a community center that people in the town know that people go there to visit, do whatever, that can be identified as a traditional cultural property. So how do you determine if it's a historic property? For Brownfields, this is kind of where I come into play. If you have to hire an archaeological contractor, or you can use somebody in-house. Regardless of that method, the agency that's giving you the money is responsible for the NRHP evaluation. So, part of the evaluation process, basically, one of the first steps you can do, you already have a phase one that's probably already been done by the time it gets to your archaeologist, or once I get informed about it, there's already been a phase one done. And that's gonna have both the locational information of the property and some of the history of it. So that's probably gonna be your first step to identify whether or not you need to go to a further process. Again, if it's within the tribal reservation, then you're gonna be dealing with the SHPO office, not the SHPO office. But generally what I will do is I'll do a file, what's called a file search with SHPO. So I sent them, sorry, I use my hands when I talk. So doing this file search with SHPO, that's gonna tell me whether or not the site's already been recorded, whether it has a site number already. If there are any sites nearby that could potentially be affected, i.e. if there's a district. And then if the site, okay, I already mentioned the historic district stuff, so we'll skip over that. Once you've done that, then you're basically determining whether or not there needs to be an archaeological inventory or some kind of historic recording. Also talk to your Brownfields team because they've already probably been working on this for a while. And so they're going to have contacts within the community, people who know about the history of the building and so forth. And so that's going to be a valuable resource for you. So a cultural resource versus a historic property. A cultural resource is a property that's older than 50 years. So this only represents the potential for it to be a historic property. Historic property is that is listed on, eligible for, or potentially eligible for the NRHP. Effects can only happen to a historic property. Effects don't happen to cultural resources. That's a very important distinguishing element. If a property is not a cultural resource, then the grant team will provide documentation to EPA or DEQ that cultural resources are not at risk from the activities. The agency documents the final determination that there are no historic properties affected, and the Section 106 review process is complete. If yes, then you begin step 3, which is the evaluation. So if you hire a CRM firm, they would conduct the evaluation survey. Well, they'll write a report and submit it to the agency, not to SHPO. They submit it to the agency. This report should include the report and a site form, and that site form and the report will both include a detailed description of the property, detailed photos, site structure dimensions, architectural descriptions if that's applicable, history of the property, evaluation of the property under criterions A through D. Again, that's, if you don't know what those are, that's a big rabbit hole. I'm not really going to get into it. Evaluation of the integrity of the property. And so these things get submitted to the agency. And that submittal should also include GIS data and a special form that SHPO requires, which is called the MED form. If you're going to hire a contractor, so like if you're working with, there's somebody that, unlike DEQ, who has their own in-house pocket archaeologist to do the work for you, if you have to hire someone, SHPO contains or maintains a list of archaeological contractors. This doesn't mean that they're licensed for the state because there is no real licensing program for contractors in archaeology. This is just a list of people who do work in the state. So ultimately, it is the agency's responsibility to make the determination of NRHP eligibility. So that's determining whether it's either not eligible or eligible to the NRHP. And again, eligible sites, if I give the definition, are the only thing that can have an adverse effect. Okay. Submit the report and associated documents through the SHPO online portal. That's for Montana. Different states have different ways of dealing with it, so consult with your state SHPO. And currently, if you're in Montana, it's just digital. We no longer do physical copies of reports or site forms. So the submittal package should contain an official letter requesting concurrence for eligibility of the site, whether it's listed. Well, technically, if it's already listed, you're just verifying that it's still listed. But concurrence for eligibility, potential eligible, not eligible. And then you're also getting concurrence for project effects, whether or not there's going to be an adverse effect or no adverse effect. If there will be an adverse effect, the agency will consult with the SHPO or the TIPO, depending, and your case team, and then go to step 4. Yes.
We go back on.
What's that?
You go back to 3. So just to clarify, the agency at this point is EPA, correct? I'm pointing at this.
Technically, except for the fact that we have delegated authority from the EPA to run the Section 106 process.
For us. But
For
what
us.
about for all the other local green?
For anybody else who's not working through DEQ, then yes, the EPA would be the agency. Yeah.
And then does EPA submit the report? Or
yes.
We repeat the question.
They asked if EPA would submit the report, and I said yes. So in fact, if somebody were to submit something to SHPO that doesn't come from an agency, it will disappear into a void. It will not get responded to. And so it has to come from an agency for them to be able to respond to it. So step 4, then you're looking, so once you know you're having an adverse effect, you have to come up with either some kind of a treatment plan or a mitigation plan. Treatment plan is really kind of designed to avoid doing any kind of impacts or minimizing those impacts. Where a mitigation plan is more if you know there's going to be impacts and you have to do something to offset those. When you're developing either a treatment plan or mitigation plan, there's no set rules on how to do it. Basically, the more creative you can be, the more likely it is that SHPO is going to agree with it. And especially if it's doing something that promotes education of the public. But mitigation plans are usually tend to be data recovery plans. And in archaeology terms, that's full scale excavation. With Brownfields projects, that's not a very common occurrence, though it can happen. And so, yeah. Okay. So the memorandum of agreement is basically the mechanism by which SHPO and everybody, all parties are involved, know how things are going to be taken care of. And so this is developed in consultation with any involved agencies. So if we were developing one, we'd also include the EPA in developing it, and SHPO. Now, all that being said, going next one. Now that I've said all that, there is a bit of a caveat in the fact that CERCLA is where a lot of the funding comes from the EPA. And under CERCLA, you don't have to do some of these processes. And what that means is because CERCLA only requires substantive compliance with Section 106. So the MOA thing, if you're in a rush, you can probably get away without doing it. You just develop a mitigation plan or a treatment plan and submit it. But if you have time on your project, I highly recommend just go ahead and doing the full Section 106. But if you're in a crunch, time crunch, whatever, look into what CERCLA requires. You may not have to go through all the hoops and cut some of the red tape. So, questions?
About how long does the consultation process take if you go through the whole thing?
So SHPO has 30 days once they receive a document from me to respond. And if they don't respond within that 30 days, then it defaults into a concurrence by default.
But if we have questions on anything, or there's missing information or anything like that, I was just saying that, if there's missing information in the report, or we have questions or need clarification, and we send it back to the agency, when we get that back, that does reset our 30 days. So essentially, we would get 30 days every time we're receiving new information from the agency, just as a heads up, I guess.
Is your 50-year requirement apply to modular?
So the question is, does the 50-year requirement apply to modular buildings? Yes. In fact, one of the worst projects I ever worked on, I had to record a trailer park with over 50 trailers in it, and they were all over 50 years old. And so, yeah, even things that are mobile, like vehicles, can count as a cultural resource, depending on the situation.
How long do you think from sort of initiating the process with you or another archaeologist who would do this, or the grantee, how long kind of would you estimate the whole process on an average site? Not one where you needed to do the mitigation as well, but how much time mentally a person should allow?
So the question is basically, how long does this process take, or how long should you budget your time for? And of course, like anything, it's going to depend on the resource on the site. If it's something that's already recorded, especially if it's something that's already listed on the National Register, that's gonna be quick, because all the work's already been done. All you have to do is kind of update the site, determine what kind of effect you're gonna have. You know, if you're only doing some remodeling on the inside, chances are you're not gonna have an effect, and it's a pretty quick process. So basically, the slow part is the 30 days for them to review. But other sites, an example is the Carlton Roundhouse. You know, we've been working on that one for 4 or 5 years and trying to get it through the Section 106 process. So it depends, but overall, on an average site, you're probably looking at a couple months.
Who generally begins this process? Does that come from whoever has the Brownfields grant? Does it come from the contractor? Does it come from EPA? Who is, I guess, the most responsible for identifying this as a site that we should be contacting SHPO?
So the question is, who's responsible for initiating the process? And bottom line is, whatever agency is in charge is responsible for kicking it off. Now, for us, Brownfields, DEQ Brownfields, since we kind of have a delegated authority from EPA, then we're kind of responsible for determining whether or not that kicks off, even though EPA overall is the ultimate agency in charge of the project. But we have the authority to make that decision, and it should be an agency decision. Whichever agency you're getting the federal funds from, they're ultimately in charge of that decision.
You should talk to your EPA product manager on all stations.
That is just all of us, but then responsibility.
EPA cannot do that, so I'm trying to figure this out right now, like in real time, like what is the new E106? It's not that new, but E106, since we're now doing for a big thing, now have we kind of more. So, but there will be some your side. The fee for that will be getting an architectural historian to provide us with Smithsonian number, that documentation, it has to be done by somebody. Correct, it has to be done as the qualification to explore architectural specialist.
Technically, no. I mean, I can go and do the architectural description and evaluation of a building. And I'm just an archaeologist. I don't have architectural history background. So as long as it's a related field, history, archaeology, architectural historian, they can all make decisions on whether or not it's a historic property and evaluate it.
So I guess you have an hour left. You should get one of the contractors, their contractor list on your retainer for either Smithsonian numbers or follow-ups, and then or non-monthly for the initial listing. But then
Yeah, I will say that even though I as an archaeologist can do the evaluation, an architectural historian is going to do a much better job at it. Just because we overlap in our techniques and field of study a little bit, doesn't mean that there is not better suited people to do it. Any other questions?
So EPA
EDA and pay for something that it's nice that it's illegal. You did 200 miles, like there, well, elevation, it's like over.
And just to clarify the process a little bit too, when I record a new site, as you say, I have to go through and I have to get a Smithsonian number from SHPO for that site. That happens before my report gets turned in. I have to have that number to complete the report, complete the site form ahead of time before the final product gets sent in.
And I'll also say that's why doing a file search is important, because some sites may have already received a Smithsonian number. So in that case, we would, depending on the last recordation of that building, we may or may not ask for just a site update, which is much simpler than like the first recording of the site, especially if the site has already been determined, like given an eligibility determination of eligible or not eligible, or like James said, if it's already listed. So file search is very important to kind of helping determine next steps in that process.
You do file search that show like they apply for state historic, these Form 1 state historic grants.
So no, file search is just going to tell you if there are previously recorded properties or sites within your legal location search. So that would not tell you if there's already a tax credit project, which I think is what you're referring to for like the first part of that. So that won't tell you anything about tax credits. You could search for that via like the Park Service, or ask the building owner specifically would be, I guess, our best recommendation for finding out if there's a tax credit project started. And then that's where, I think what you're getting at then is like, if that information can be used then on the site form, right? Which, yes and no, I guess it's one of those things where it is very building dependent, and we're still kind of figuring it out on our end in terms of what we allow for a site recordation, which we are pretty flexible on. You know, we don't require people to use our exact forms. So that's where that kind of part one of a tax credit could potentially be used as that site recordation. But we would recommend probably asking us just to make sure that we're all on the same page before submitting that as the site record.
And it's kind of a general rule of thumb that if a site has been previously recorded, if it's been about roughly 15 years, give or take, depending on the site, they may not ask for an update at all versus asking for an update. It depends on just how long it's been. And if you know that there's been changes to the building from the time that it was originally recorded, then it's more than likely they're going to ask for some update.
What are your recommendations for a site that has been deemed historically significant, is a historic property, but is not architecturally salvageable?
I'll let you talk about it.
Okay.
It depends.
I mean, well, yeah, honestly. Okay, so,
Your repeat question.
yeah, well, just to make sure I understand what the question is. So essentially, it's an example of, we have a site that's been, let's say, already determined eligible. So we know it's significant. SHPO has already agreed with potentially a previous agency on that. And, basically, it has to be demolished, or like, it can't be saved. I mean, our office can't not let you do a project. So even if it were to become an adverse effect, which demolition would be, in this case of already having a property be determined eligible, like, we can't stop your project. Your project can totally go through with full demolition. That's kind of where that next step of a memorandum of agreement or some other mitigation, depending on the whole circle of intersection, would come into place. But really, there's no, like, yeah, we can't stop a project, so you can still do the project fully. There's just, yeah, process then that you would have to follow mitigation of that, historic property. I don't know, did I answer the question? Okay.
I'm trying to think if I can add on to that. There's not a project out there that goes through the Section 106 process that can't go through, and it can't be stopped by Section 106. Because Section 106 is very process oriented. It's as long as you follow that process, you know, you can dig a transmission line through the White House lawn as long as you follow the process. And that's what it's about.
Just wanted to share, on how I was thinking to budget appropriately, for Brownfield grantees. This piece can accumulate quite a bit of hours and time and resources, which lead to real costs. And so make sure that you're budgeting appropriately your grant for SHPO. For example, if one Brownfield site getting up, we accumulated around $9,000 in this particular compliance effort for this piece.
Yes, cultural resources can become very expensive. That's why a lot of people are grateful when DEQ steps in, is able to do the cultural work for them. Large projects easily go over budget just due to cultural resource activities. Anybody else? No? Once, twice, thrice? Okay.
Thank you so much. So up next, is community involvement, community relation plan. So those of us that have been in the Brownfields game for quite a while, and I think even for some of the Brownfields newbies, you probably hear this a lot. I mean, community engagement, community involvement is key for any Brownfields project that's going to be successful. And I would say that is applicable, whether it's a Brownfields project, a city, whatever it is. I mean, engaging with your community, having an open dialogue is really important. And especially when we're talking about maybe cleanup, you know, a lot of people are curious, or what's the contaminant? And, you know, you don't want to show up or have your contractor show up to a site to do cleanup and somebody's picketing or the project gets stalled because the community hasn't been informed, they're not involved. They don't know what's going on. So it's really important and really key to make sure that you have a good, solid community engagement, community involvement plan, so everybody's speaking the same language and supporting the same project going forward. So with that, the next topic is going to be community relations plan. We will have Greg Davis from Region 8 and Kate Lucas with PhD Tab to cover this topic.
That's loaded. All right.
Yeah, and that's the camera. So
there's the camera.
There we go. Oh, right up over there.
All right. Kate, am I just gonna go in and you want to go after me?
Yep.
All right, cool. Well, I'm gonna talk a little bit about community relations plans. I went through, I know that some of you were at the new grantee meeting, and there was a pretty detailed community relations plan. I pilfered what I could from previous presentations, but I also found that like a lot of the presentations we give are like 50 slides on a community relations plan and what you can do. And I thought, in my kind of streamlining, methodology, I just kind of, we're going to break down what is required. Now this can be different for different grant types. So, what are the grant requirements? First of all, this is going to be for all three types of grants. Since most of you are grantees or contractors, I think we're, we can talk, in terms of this. All the grant requirements are going to be basically the same. Provide reasonable notice, provide opportunity for public comment on proposed cleanup and response to comments. So that's kind of a cleanup specific, but, and then include the comments and responses in the administrative record. So that's whether you have a cleanup grant, or you have an assessment grant, whether you have an RLF grant, it's almost always going to be some form of that. But do look at your terms and conditions. So outside of that, what else is required? It's what's in your work plan. So this is the one thing where if you're going to negotiate a work plan, this is where you can maybe negotiate a work plan up front. Because a lot of times you'll have the grant proposal will be like, we're going to have 7 community meetings with 42 people each. The grant proposals, you know how crazy specific they are. So it'll be like, and then you'll start going through and be like, maybe this doesn't really make sense. And that's where you can kind of have that give and take and make a little bit of those modifications, because sometimes you look back at your proposal, and this happens to me all the time. We get a new grantee and they look at the proposal and they'll say, wait, we committed to what? And which, you know, it's, and you can make some modifications. Granted, you know, some things were done in the grant was scored that way for a reason. But you can make some minor modifications to the work plan, and I think that upfront is a great place to do that. So what are some objectives to a community relations plan? Keeping citizens informed and involved so they're aware of potential concerns. You know, that's always the number one. That's what we always think of. Is this going to affect us? Is there going to be a giant plume of lead dust in the air? Well, you probably want to let people know. But 2 other things that I think are important, and these are really not stated in EPA type guidance, is you want to generate interest from investors and businesses. You really want to kind of showcase your project to say, hey, this is happening. How can we generate more interest in the community, get more of these projects? And then to garner support from community groups and from residents. So this is where I could have to look at, because I just stole this slide. So I have to read it more or less, but the key elements of it: community involvement plan, community relation plan, same thing. Project definition, what's happening, steering committee roles. You know, that's really for your assessment grant and for if you're going to be having like outreach events. Define the type of activities. Your contact list, your methods for soliciting, receiving feedback. Well, if you're looking for a cleanup, I always go for like the smallest possible community relations plan, especially if it's like an indoor asbestos type cleanup. You're not going to, you want to spending your money on the cleanup itself. So in that terms, you know, community relations plan can be 2 paragraphs. We have a project. Here's where you can find the ABCA. Here's where the project is described. This is what we're doing. This we're going to put it on X media, whatever media. There's no rules or requirements on what type of media you have to use. A lot of times people will go to the newspaper, but the closest newspaper is 80 miles away and has low distribution. You know, then, well, yeah, Facebook is a lot more, you know, it's a lot more appropriate. That's where everybody goes. So there's no specific requirements on what type of media to use, how long that goes, what is reasonable notice. It's just what is logical, what meets your objectives. So only 3 more slides left because I think there are 3 specific things that work well. 3 type of community engagement. First, a kickoff meeting. I think kickoff meetings are good, especially if you can get all your regulators there, if you can get realtors there, if you can get like community partners involved, small nonprofits. It just make it like informal. This is what we're doing. These are the potential projects. Kickoff meetings work really well. Just a lot of bang for your buck. Number 2, site walks. With all my grantees, I've basically said, you got to stop having community meetings, especially if there's nobody going. You're paying for a space. You're like doing, you're getting a space. You're doing like food. It just becomes kind of a pain in the butt. And I always think the best thing you can do, especially if it's a small area and all of your sites or your single site that where you're doing a big cleanup, you can walk to. Do that. Site walk is super easy. We'll meet at the corner at this time, put a little flyer in the next coffee shop. There you go. And then site activation activities. Anybody know where this is? That's Butte, yep. Nice. I think this is this is the most I've ever been excited about a grantee, like, because Julie Jackson was at our meeting in Denver and she saw this activated alley and she said, "Oh my God, this is amazing." And then went home and bought string lights and then proceeded to do an event the next week in Butte. But a site activation activity, you know, is a great thing. If you can just have, people don't have the ability, a lot of people don't have the ability to envision things on their own. They just kind of have not really gone into that kind of mental space. And sometimes you think, say, you know, the Hamilton Fire Hall, maybe they can't envision, you know, what that activated alley would look like in between that and the Masons building. So when you can do stuff that kind of showcases exactly what you're thinking, it just helps a ton. Any questions?
All right. Nothing so far. Okay, so with the next few, okay, that was 15 minutes, but our last session ended a little bit early. And so I think for the next like 20 minutes, no, not 20, let's still spend 15 minutes. At all the tables here, I gave out a little flyer. This was some thoughts to get you started thinking about your communities and the type of engagement that's maybe most suited. Because again, not every type of engagement is suitable for each type of community. Greg mentioned a site walkthrough, but if you've got an asbestos-filled building with a lot of friable asbestos, maybe best not to do a site walk. Unless all of your community members happen to own E, which, you know, I personally don't. So just some questions to get you started thinking about community engagement methods. So we'll take about 15 minutes to kind of have discussions amongst your groups, your tables. If you are in a smaller table and you'd like to combine, please feel free to do that. And then Maggie, I think for those of you who are online, please go ahead and you can, I think the exercise file is in the chat of the, yeah, it's just in the chat of the meeting. And then if you have questions or you would like to revisit this form, it either is or will be uploaded to the workshop webpage. So you can take a look at that in the future. So it'll take about 15 minutes now. Okay, I'm gonna ask everyone to wrap up their discussions. We're going to do a really quick debrief here in a second. Once our online folks are all back in the room with us. Oh, you can't hear. Hello? Okay, sorry guys, I know it's not that loud. Okay, just asking you all to wrap up your conversations. We're gonna do a quick debrief in our next 8 minutes. And I think we're working on getting, are the online people back in the room? 30 seconds. 30 seconds, okay. You have 30 seconds, but don't start a new topic. One thing to note, for folks who did not sign the sign-in sheet when they came in, if you will do that before you leave, we just like to have a head count for our reporting requirements. There is a sheet, it should have your name on it. If you registered within the last like 2 or 3 days, you may just need to add your name to the end of the list there. Okay. All right, so, we've got our online group. Is there anyone from the digital attendant version who would like to unmute and just give us a little summary of what your group talked about?
I'll go first. So we looked at the worksheet, but I was more interested in hearing about what other groups are doing for their community involvement plans that's being successful. I've only had to do a couple of them so far, and one of them worked out really well. It was for a school project, and so I just tagged on their agenda for their school board meeting, and I got a big audience, and I got a lot of feedback that way. And another one, no one showed up, and it was just a public notice meeting. And so I am more interested in hearing from other grantees what are their avenues that they're doing that is actually working.
Yeah, that's great. Were there any takeaways from that conversation, Tanya?
Yeah, so Rachel from Salt Lake County stated that they do a lot of their CRPs almost as part of a board meeting, which I thought was really smart because a lot of your partners and local governments, other nonprofits, whoever your board is and guests are, they're going to get that information. She also invites the state and her project officer from EPA to those meetings as well. As she was talking about that, you know, I was just sort of thinking, well, if that works, as long as you're providing an avenue for community input and feedback, will that meet the criteria for the community relations plan?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes. You know, if you're offering an opportunity for feedback, and nobody is interested in giving feedback, then you've met your mandate. You know, it is maybe something to think about, trying some alternate methods, maybe issuing an online survey or partnering with a different organization. Or one of the things that my group talked about was offering snacks, including a hot fudge Sunday event in February during a snowstorm, which did result in a very high turnout. So just something to think about. If you're not, if you're not catching any fish, consider throwing your net on the other side of the boat, so to speak. Okay, anyone from in person who has things they'd like to share? Let's get one volunteer. There's my high school French teacher said volunteer or victim. Okay.
We just talked about a recent project where we did neighborhood outreach, and we just went door to door to the neighbors. We went door to door to the neighbors around that area before it began. And we want to let you know what's going to be happening here in the next week or so. You're going to see some trucks, we're going to see people in a house that's building that's been abandoned for 20 years. And started a conversation, and we thought it was very positive. They all really appreciated us stopping by, and we're really excited to hear that something going to be happening.
Yeah, so for folks online, if you weren't able to catch that, basically, they had a project, a vacant building that had been vacant for 20 years, and visiting with nearby residents and having conversations with them, and just letting them know what's going on, because they would see activity in the building that had probably not been opened to the public, you know, in a really long time. Cedar, it looks like you've got your hand raised. You want to share something? Oh, they put something in the chat. Oh, it won't let me.
Okay, there we go. We got it to unmute. Sorry about that. We talked about like the community engagement and stuff. A big thing we do down here in Lower Brule is we do a lot of gatherings. So we'll go meet with our interagency meeting, which is all of the directors get together. We sit down, we visit about what everybody has coming up and if we can attend or if we can put a booth up for everybody to come visit. We do a family unity day or community involvement. We always do some type of feed. There is somebody that wants to cook or whatever, and it gets everybody coming in and you sit down, you visit. It's actually really great. It's worked very well for all of us. Just within my office, so it's like water quality, the solid waste and my program. We've had quite a few really successful meetings with everybody, and like you're always allowed to voice your opinion, your questions, everything like that. So that's worked very well for us if you guys are able to do that.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and regardless of whether you have a grant and you're required to prepare a community CRM or CIP, a community relations plan or a community involvement plan. Brownfields are sites that can involve a lot of community resentment and tension and curiosity. And you know, whether or not it's required, having engagement strategies available for people who are interested in learning more about the site and what's going on with the future of it. It's always good to have, you know, a number of different avenues to reach people and communicate your method or your message. Okay, so with that, we are going to get started on our last session of the day, identifying funding sources after cleanup. So we have me, Samantha Gilk, if she is still, oh, you're still here, great. We also have Samantha True from DNRC, Julie Flynn and Megan Guevara from MapTech. Oh, no, sorry, that's the Mountains and Plains Environmental Justice Grants Hub. So if all of you, if I just called your name, if you'll come up here, I only have a PowerPoint presentation for Megan and myself. So the rest of us will be speaking kind of off the cuff. But yeah, as long as you're speaking into the microphone, that's not a problem. Okay. All right, I'm happy to go first, or somebody wants to go first. Okay, I'm holding the mic. Yeah, okay, we'll do presentation first, and then we can move in. Okay, so this is intended to be a really kind of quick and dirty introduction to different funding sources that can be used for brownfields that pair well with EPA brownfield grants. We as KSU TAB do not offer grant funding, but we can help you identify different sources of grant funding and connect you to other resources. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of some of the things that we do that can help you figure out how to both clean up and redevelop your brownfield site. Okay, so if you are applying for a cleanup grant, one of the things you need is a well-defined reuse plan. But in brownfields, things are often changing, and sometimes you propose something, you may have a developer online who then drops out or moves away or just decides that they don't want to spend the money on the project, and you're back at square one. And you have a site that's cleaned up, you've got brownfield grant funding, but you don't really know what to do with your site after that cleanup is complete. So one of the things that we can do is provide assistance with community engagement and reuse visioning. And we can come to your community, implement some of these community engagement methods that we just talked about, and help build consensus around your site, educate the community about the environmental conditions that are going on. Really anything that you need to help kind of create a community supported reuse vision. We can also do things like do renderings of proposed reuses once those have been identified by either the community, or we do market analyses, highest and best use studies, these kind of more economic analyses that can help you identify some of the most sustainable and realistic reuse options. Oh, and one thing to note is all of our services are free. So you don't get any money, but you also don't have to spend any money, which is, I would say, maybe almost as good, because you don't have to do any acres reporting. That's on us. Another thing we do a lot of are resource roadmaps. And this is one that pairs really well with kind of the two previous steps. So we may do community engagement, develop a reuse vision, conduct a market study to see whether that's feasible. And then as a final deliverable, we can help identify steps in the redevelopment process and funding sources that can pair to each of those steps. So again, we're not giving you any grant funding, but I've worked on projects where we have identified up to 70, 75 different sources of grant funding that could be applicable to a particular project. So this is a good place to kind of help you identify a place to start, at least. And we also provide recommendations for kind of a strategic approach, identifying which of those grant funding sources is going to be most appropriate, most likely to be awarded, and most likely to result in a site that has been redeveloped. And here is an unintelligible fuzzy screenshot of an Excel file. So this is just a couple of resources, or just a couple of the resources within the roadmap. But you can see here we provide all the information that's most useful. So the program name, the agency or department or organization that offers it. We're not just looking at federal programs, we're looking at state programs, foundation programs. We offer, and we're not just looking at grants, we also look at kind of public finance options, loans, other programs that are available. Also sometimes other technical assistance programs, or just kind of online or virtual or physical toolkits that can be used to kind of help implement a particular portion of your vision. We also include information like the amount of grant funding that's available, the cost share, application deadlines, how often those grants are offered, eligibility, so what kind of entities are eligible for those funds, and then just notes about kind of best practices, just information about the grant and what it can be used for. Okay, that's it for me. Megan? Thanks so much.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Megan Guevara, and I'm here to talk a little bit about the Thriving Communities Grantmaker Initiative, which is also an EPA-funded program funded through the Inflation Reduction Act. And my organization is the Grantmaker for Region 8. You can go to the next slide. And we are part of the Mountains and Plains Environmental Justice Grants Hub, which includes a number of partner organizations, including here in Montana, the Montana Association of Conservation Districts and the Montana Watershed Coordination Council. We do work closely with MapTech, who you'll hear from tomorrow. They're a TA provider for the EPA, providing information on a lot of grant programs, including ours. And we are the organization that you actually submit your grant application to. We can go to the next slide. So this funding stream, we have $40 million that's available over the next 3 years for Region 8 to support environmental justice projects. So a range of projects in communities that have been identified as disadvantaged using the Inflation Reduction Act criteria. And eligible grant recipients are nonprofit organizations, tribal governments and intertribal consortia, local governments, institutions of higher education, and Native American organizations. And this grant program is designed to be accessible to organizations that have not received federal funding before, that have seen the federal grant process as onerous. We try to make it a little bit more simple and streamlined. So we hope that organizations that may not otherwise apply for federal funding will consider this opportunity. Go to the next slide. And Brownfields remediation activities are definitely eligible as activities if they are being conducted to the benefit of disadvantaged communities. And the grant program is divided up into 3 tiers. So tier 1 are assessment grants for any research projects, any better understanding of the issues that you're facing on your Brownfields projects, and also opportunities for surveys, studies, sampling would all be tier 1. Tier 2 grants are planning grants. So any of the planning activities for your mitigation or remediation activities would fall under tier 2. And then tier 3 are called development grants. We also call them implementation grants for the actual implementation of your cleanup activities. So if you want to reach out, if you've got any questions about those tiers, we're happy to share. Tier 1 are up to $150,000 1-year projects. Tier 2 are up to $250,000 for 1 to 2 years, and tier 3 are up to 2 years and $350,000 projects. These are some examples of possible project topics, but the general criteria that we talk about are if you are addressing any type of environmental health or justice issue, and if you're doing so in an IRA disadvantaged community, and you're doing so in a way that engages that community in the design or implementation of your project, then we are open to hearing about it in your application. And you can get in touch with us if you have any questions about projects that you're considering and whether or not they might be eligible for the program. And many of you may have seen this before. This is the EPA's EJ screen tool, and this is what we're using for determining what communities fall under that IRA disadvantaged community designation. So there is a video on our website about how to use the tool if you're new to it, and being able to identify the area of benefit for your project and whether or not that falls under that disadvantaged communities designation. And you're asked to include a copy of your map with your project area marked on it as part of your application. This is the first of 3 cycles of grant funding that are open for us. Applications are due on December 12th. Our website is included in the presentation, so that will get out to everyone, and it's mapejgrants.org. And it's an online application, but you can also submit a version through the mail. And those applications are available in English and Spanish. Any organization can submit up to 2 applications per cycle, and you're welcome to apply to multiple cycles. And over the course of the 3-year grant program, any single applicant can receive up to 2 awards totaling up to $600,000. And some additional considerations, as we've heard about today, making sure that we're aware of the various other EPA regulations that apply to these grant programs. So if you are considering a project that includes land acquisition and purchase, that is allowable, but it can't be more than 50% of the total budget for your project. If you are a fiscally sponsored organization, or you are a fiscal sponsor, there are different caps and different limitations on funding. So happy to share that information if that applies to anyone. And anything that includes human subject research, construction, or any collection of environmental information that would require a quality assurance plan also has some additional EPA requirements that I'm happy to talk about. I'm glad you're going to be talking about BABA as part of the conversation tomorrow. But you can feel free to reach out to me or talk to my colleague Bianca and I while we're here this evening. We're unfortunately not able to stay tomorrow, but our colleagues from MapTech will be here tomorrow and will also be able to answer any questions about the grant making program if you'd like to reach out. And I do host Montana office hours once a week for anybody that would like to get in touch with additional questions. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. My name is Samantha True, and I run the Reclamation and Development Grant Program for the Conservation and Resource Development Division of our state Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. I guess the quick and dirty is that this grant program is under our Resource Development Bureau, and we are funded through several resource indemnity trusts and different tax programs on some of the development that occurs across our state. And this program is meant to repair, reclaim, restore any environmental damage that has occurred as a result of natural resource development, hazardous waste, and support other crucial state needs. And so who is eligible for this grant program? It is geared towards local governments. So cities, towns, conservation districts, tribal government, and divisions of Montana state government, including departments, agencies, boards, and commissions. If you are not one of those not full exhaustive list members, you can be sponsored by someone who is eligible for that grant. We do not do pass-through grants, but you, your sponsor can do some of the grant management and you can do some of the on-the-ground work. We have two types of grants that are covered by this grant program. Our planning grants, which are up to $75,000. And those are for project planning, site assessment, groundwater assessment, sampling, feasibility designs, and other investigations, including support for writing grant applications. These grants are available periodically throughout the year. Usually about 3 cycles occur each year. And they are not required to lead to a project grant, but we love to see folks coming in for planning that leads to our next grant, which is a project grant, which is our on-the-ground construction. And those grants are up to $500,000, and they the application for those opens up on every even year in the beginning of the year. Is required by statute to close by May 15th, and then those grants are reviewed and presented to the legislature for their ultimate approval. So we're in that process right now with our 17 grants that applied this year. So those grants will not open again until the beginning of 2026. But planning grants are occurring all the time, and the next cycle will open January 15th of 2025. One of the important things that Jason pointed out to me in our discussion about this meeting today was that unlike the Brownfields program, the Reclamation and Development Grant Program provides grants for projects that are restoring the environment for the sake of the environment. You do not have to have an economic development plan. The end goal can be restoration. The end goal can be mitigation, putting in a wetland, reconnecting a floodplain. Once that reclamation has occurred, we have no requirements for what happens to the site after that, which is really great. And I think that's it. I did put some of these mustard colored brochures on the table where you wrote your name tag. Please take them. It breaks down some of the requirements for our grants. And if you have any questions, please come find me.
You add the grant writing.
Yes, as some of the members in our room can tell you, we do have the capacity to support your grant applications to Brownfield programs. So we can help you pay for a consultant to help you write your Brownfields applications. Because we know those are onerous, and at times smaller communities can have difficulty being competitive. So hiring a consultant can be a really good way to ensure you have a better chance of seeing those projects funded. And that cap is not really set on our website, but it's typically around $5,000. And I think that's a great opportunity to help facilitate these projects getting federal funds. I guess one other thing to mention about the program is that we do not have match requirements, but you can use your federal funds for some of those matches. So you can combine Brownfields funds with project grant funds or planning grant funds from this program to leverage as much as you can towards these projects.
Hey, so my name is Julie Flynn. I'm with the Montana Department of Commerce and specifically in the housing division. And Jason asked me to talk a bit about once sites are cleaned up, what funding sources we have available to do affordable housing. And of course, I think all cleaned up buildings in the middle of our towns should be converted to affordable housing. So I'll just put that idea out in all of your heads right now. That's the best use of all the properties. But I primarily manage the grant funds that we get from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And so once a property's been cleaned up with Brownfields, you can access our funds, maybe some low-income housing tax credit funds, maybe some historic tax credit funds so that you can layer EPA's requirements with HUD's requirements, with the Department of Interior's requirement. If you're in a rural area, you can throw in a little USDA rural development and then your hair turns white. So there's my warning right there. It's fun and exciting work and oh so gratifying when it gets done and you get to visit with the folks benefiting from the new homes. Anyway, we primarily have three sources of funds, the Home Investment Partnership Program, the National Housing Trust Fund, and then Community Development Block Grant Funds. We use a portion of that for affordable housing around the state. We typically have our application deadlines in the fall. Our home and housing trust funds can be applied for by private developers, for-profit, nonprofits, sometimes communities as well. There's, I don't know, probably 10 to 15 developers around the state who access our funds pretty regularly. And then we take you through all the requirements, similar to what the DEQ does with Brownfields grant funds. A lot of the same requirements apply to our funds, and the chief, the main end result is affordable homes for income eligible families or individuals, and rents are typically restricted. Purchase prices, if it's single family homes for sale, those are restricted as well. And then another big part of the work at Department of Commerce in the housing division is the low-income housing tax credit program, which is a way to get the private sector funds into these properties by providing federal tax credits to investors who need those tax credits. And so they invest the money, often combined with our grant funds, to build affordable homes. Trying to think what else. You know, every once in a while from HUD we get one-time sources of funds. We're kind of working through the rest of that through the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan Act. Yeah, question.
Yes, ma'am. Does any of your grant funding also provide a development for workforce housing? Maybe not low income, but for those that can't afford the cost of where we live.
Yep, we're having lots of conversations around the missing middle. And I should have brought our income limits with me. I often tell folks that when we talk about the income eligibility for our programs, it does cover a lot of folks. So for a family of 4, in most of our counties, I think the income limit is $80,000. So that does cover a lot of working families. I would say most people who live in our affordable homes that we help finance are working families. Often, you know, they have 2 or 3 jobs per household. So some of the Board of Housing's products can serve a higher income level. So like the Montana Board of Housing first-time homebuyer mortgages, first mortgages. I have one of those mortgages from when my husband and I first moved here and bought our house. So those can go up to, I believe, 100% of the area median income. Trying to think of there are some other small pots of funds that can be used. The last state legislative session passed a host of programs within House Bill 819. So those, I think some of those, I'm looking at Amanda in Deer Lodge, some of those are being deployed in the Deer Lodge area in Powell County to do some single family development for higher income folks, or the missing middle folks. So I know just enough to kind of be dangerous about those things. They're not managed through our department, but always happy to, reach out to me and I can put you in touch with the right folks who do have the full. I'll just refer you to Amanda. She can answer all your questions. Other questions, other things I should cover, Jason? Yeah.
So you have a community that has multiple downtown buildings. Think they want to pursue housing there. Should they partner, or should they try it on their own, or should they partner with the developer, and how do they connect?
Yep, so that's a great question. And I alluded to the complexity of these projects. You can't just get a $750,000 grant from me and go build 16 affordable homes. It's just getting more complicated by the day. And with the increase in costs and shortage of materials and labor, the funds that we're getting haven't gone up at all. I get less money now than I did in 2004. So costs have gone up a little bit over the last 20 years. So you do have to get more and more creative. That adds to the complexity. And so, yes, when you have buildings downtown that you'd like to start addressing, the planning departments are always good spots to start. Like I said, we have developers in the state who do this all the time. I can put you in touch with those folks. I can't obviously recommend one over the other, but happy to give you a list of folks that we have experience with who've done these projects. I just can list a few that we've done, that we've been involved with, along with Brownfields funds, a Lewistown building in downtown on the main street of Lewistown. They have now a health clinic on the first floor and then affordable homes on the upper 2 floors. There's an old brothel in Great Falls, in the middle of Great Falls, that's now being converted to permanent supportive housing on the upper floors, and the main floor will be supportive services for the folks experiencing homelessness who are now living in the building. So those are the 2 most recent ones. I know in the past, we helped renovate the upper floors of a couple buildings on Main Street in Miles City as well. So lots of opportunity there, and we like nothing better than getting a clean building and the letter of no further action from DEQ that we can put in our HUD file and be relieved about. There's one little paragraph in the HUD regulations about ensuring that there's no contamination at a site. We've got pages about historic preservation, more pages about floodplain, noise, all of that, and then one little paragraph about contamination. And that can often lead to very complex parts of a project to get any potential contamination cleaned up and or documented that it's not there. Great, thanks.
And this is the camera, so step, we give it some.
Stand right here.
No, just to give it a little back up a little bit, so it'll.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Tran. I'm the Historic Architecture Specialist at the State Historic Preservation Office. We are physically and administratively housed at the Montana Historical Society. And per our mandate under the National Historic Preservation Act, we administer about 8 different programs reviewing compliance. The federal undertakings is one of them. Another program is the Historic Tax Credit Program, or its official name, which I always have to look at what it is. The Federal Historic Preservation Tax Incentives Program through the National Park Service. SHPO, we act as kind of a middleman on this program. The National Park Service certifies historic tax projects, and we as the SHPO, we liaise directly with property owners and architects, and we ensure that we help you ensure that your scope of work is going to have the best chance of getting certified and approved by the Park Service. The tax credit program is really, it's been around since 1976. Part of the Tax Reform Act of 1976. Over the course of the past 25 or so years, there have been about $29 million in federal tax credits that have been leveraged across $144 million in private investment. And that's been across about 70 projects in 18 communities across the state. So it really has been used pretty expansively, and we're seeing exponential increase in its use. Right now, we have Samantha and I are both historic tax credit project reviewers, and we're also both compliance reviewers. So if you want to talk to us about either of those, we're happy to answer questions. Right now, we have about 24 active tax credit projects, one of which is the Bats Block that Julie brought up in Great Falls, that's being rehabbed into permanent housing for those experiencing homelessness. So the tax credit program, it offers you a 20% dollar for dollar credit against your, it's a 20% dollar for dollar income tax credit against the cost of rehabilitation of an income producing building that is listed in the National Register of Historic Places. And that's kind of a mouthful, and I'm not qualified to interpret tax code. There are people at the IRS who can help you interpret the tax code for this project, but suffice to say that it really has provided a great incentive for rehabbing and hanging on to historic buildings where otherwise their redevelopment and rehabilitation would have been financially not feasible. The tax credit program is a 3-part electronic application. The basic eligibility requirements are the following. So the building has to be income producing, it has to be depreciable for 5 years. If you're a nonprofit or a local government without a tax burden, what you can do is you can form a syndicate with a partner who does have a tax burden. You can take advantage of the program in that way. And I will just say that there have been lots of successfully certified projects over the last couple of decades that have included brownfield abatement as part of their scope of work. The second requirement, so the building does have to be listed in the National Register of Historic Places, either individually or as part of a historic district. If your building is not yet listed, it doesn't mean that you can't apply. If the building is eligible, you can get it listed. It's kind of a concurrent process with applying for tax credits. You would work with yet another program in our office for that, the National Register Coordinator. Third requirement, the project has to meet the substantial rehabilitation test, which basically means the cost of the rehab has to exceed the cost of the building. This means a lot of the projects that end up getting tax credits are buildings, like I said, that would otherwise have been demolished, or they're in pretty bad condition, which is why tax credits make sense. And the last but not least requirement is that all work has to adhere to what we call the standards of rehabilitation, or the Secretary of the Interior's standards for the rehabilitation of historic properties. And I do have a list of those standards if anyone is interested in looking at them. It basically means that when you're rehabbing the building, you're hanging on to the character defining features of the building, the physical aspects of the building, interior and exterior, that help make it eligible for the National Register. So for example, if there are historic wood windows in your building, what you want to do is either restore and rehab those, or replace them with
for example, aluminum clad windows that look like the historic. If you want to put in vinyl windows and you're set on putting in vinyl windows, the tax credits are probably not a great fit for you, but there's always discussion that can be had about your scope of work. I will say that SHPO, I think I've already kind of alluded to this, but we don't provide, we're not qualified or equipped to provide tax advice or financial budgeting guidance for your project. For that, you can reach out to the IRS with questions or talk to your accountant. The Park Service also has an FAQ on their website. We also have a state historic tax credit, which is an additional 5% of the rehab costs that you would get back in the form of a tax credit. So combined, and you're like automatically eligible for state tax credits when you get certified for federal. So all in all, that's a 25% tax credit that you could get if you are certified for this program. We also do have, and I'm just going to make a little plug here, we also do have an additional grant program at SHPO specifically that we're just launching, and it's funded by the bed tax. So kind of like the Department of Commerce. They're going to be amounts of $20,000 to $100,000, and it's a grant. It's not a loan, it's not a tax credit. If you're interested in that, come talk to me. We're having an info session on Thursday night. And the deadline for that grant is going to be February 10th. So that is another, that's another opportunity if your project involves rehabilitation or restoration of a historic property. Tax credits and our own grant program are great opportunities to look into. So just come find me afterwards if you have any questions, and I'll hand it over to Jordan. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks everyone for hanging in there. I'm the last one, I promise. My name is Jordan Conley. I'm from the Montana Department of Commerce. I am the Community and Economic Vitality Program Supervisor. So my team handles 3 different programs: the Montana Historic Preservation Grant Program, Montana Main Street Program, and then Community Block Development, Economic Development Grants. I'm only going to talk about the first 2 today. Those are the ones that are most relevant here. So Montana Historic Preservation, just a quick and dirty, I think some of you are already familiar with the program. It's a relatively new grant program. It is funded, as Lindsay was saying, through the bed tax. We're only on our 3rd official cycle of it. So like I said, relatively new. The way the program works is that private, government, or nonprofit entities can come in and apply for this grant. They can apply for up to $500,000 for historic preservation work. There is a slight preference for more shovel-ready projects, I would say, and that's based on some other factors I'll get into in a second. But it's the program follows the legislative cycle, so it's on a biennium. So for example, this last cycle, the application opened in September of 2023. I have to figure out my years here. September 2023, closed in February of 2024. At Commerce, we spent the spring and summer reviewing all of the applications, consulting with SHPO, doing some other work. Then we presented our ranked list of recommended projects to the governor's office, and then once that is published in the governor's book, which just happened on the 15th, it will get presented to the legislature during this legislative session. And ultimately, they make the final decisions about funding. For the most part, I would say they have a tendency to follow our recommendations. Sometimes things can get a little complicated. Sometimes highly ranked projects are removed. Sometimes projects are added or moved up. Sometimes projects receive less funding than they asked for. But for the most part, if you're ranked highly by our team, you're likely, no guarantees, but likely to get funded by the legislature. So the amount of money we have varies. As I said, it's the bed tax, so it depends on how much money is available in that fund. For this upcoming cycle, we are unfortunately looking at much less funding than we had initially hoped for, but we probably won't be able to fund as many projects.
But the nice thing is that if you are interested or you have communities or different projects that are interested, you can encourage them to pay attention to the Long Range Planning Committee during this upcoming session. That's where they'll be discussing Montana Historic Preservation. You'll be able to get a good sense of what types of projects they're interested in, how they're receiving different types of applications, that sort of thing, and that can help guide you in your preparations for applying for the grant in future cycles. You can also take a look at all of our previously funded projects on our website or through the director's database available through the Montana Department of Commerce. The one thing to note that's really cool about this program is that, like I said, we can contract directly with the entity. So if a building is owned by a nonprofit, we contract directly with them. We don't have to go through the municipality. So that's sort of an unusual program in that sense at Commerce. So it's just something to keep in mind. It's a really direct source of funding. MHPG is also just, I think it's beautifully designed, this program, but it plays really nicely with other sources of funding. So if you want to stack various types of funding, you can use other sources, other grants, whatever you have, as a match for MHPG. So we really don't have a lot of restrictions about what kinds of funding can or cannot pair with MHPG. The other thing is that it's pretty flexible. If you need to adjust your scope of work, if you need to adjust the budget, that sort of thing, we can really accommodate that and work with you on it. In terms of the types of projects we fund, I would say most are rehabilitation projects, restoration projects. Housing is a little bit complicated. We have funded a number of mixed use projects and definitely adaptive reuse projects. Part of the specification of the grant, as requested by the legislature, is that there be demonstrated public value to the project. A number of members of the committee in the past have interpreted that to mean public access, which can be complicated when we're talking about housing, because obviously the residential units are not accessible to the public. On our team, we're really working hard to make the case that housing has a public value inherently, and that the types of housing projects we're looking at funding or that we've recommended are not ones that are just increasing value for individual owners, but are actually providing workforce housing, affordable housing, and have demonstrated community value in that sense. That said, the more successful projects are ones that have multi-uses to the building. I'm happy to answer any questions about that afterwards, but quickly I'll just turn to Main Street as well. So Main Street Montana is the state Main Street program. There's the National Main Street America program. Each state has their own version of the Main Street program. Montana's happens to be housed in the Department of Commerce. You can see on our website the full list of Main Street communities. Mostly we provide resources. So it's we do a monthly call with all the communities where they can learn about funding opportunities, various things that are going on in the communities. We do run a small grant program and we do a lot of facade grants. So that's another option for you all. And then the other nice thing about Montana Main Street communities is that sometimes when Community Montana, the division of commerce that I work in, if this almost never happens, but it did just recently happen, which is why I'm bringing it up. If there is occasionally an extra source of funding, extra money sitting around that needs to be moved out the door quickly and into communities quickly, we'll often channel it through the Main Street program. So for example, we just had $1.5 million that specifically was for mixed use and adaptive reuse projects. So immediately we contacted every single Main Street community because they know what types of projects are ready to go in their communities. And we said, can you fill out a quick application within the next 2 or 3 days and submit those? And so that we were able to really quickly award some money to those projects that were ready to go and just get it out the door. So that's a benefit to being in the Main Street community, is that if there's unexpected opportunities for funding, we'll often use Main Street as a way to get that money out the door. Yeah, happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, thanks for hanging in there. Yeah. Definitely. So you can all give you my card. You can reach out to me or our Main Street coordinator, Nikki Zerker. She's at the Department of Commerce. She will come directly to your community and do a workshop on what it means to be a Main Street community. Usually, we like to see a number of different entities involved. So there should be a coordinating organization. Often that's a chamber. Sometimes it's a downtown partnership, downtown organization. Sometimes it's a city. But she likes to present to a full range of people invested in the community. Then if the community decides they want to pursue it, they put together an application. There will be another follow-up visit from us where we, review the application, talk through the application with the members of the community. And then, then you can become a Main Street community if it's approved, if the application is approved.
There's not a population.
Nope, there are no restrictions. So we have rural communities, we have Bozeman is a Main Street community, but so is, Twin Bridges, it's really, there's a range, but there's no requirement. And if you're interested in becoming a Main Street community, but don't feel like you have the bandwidth to apply quite yet, you can still reach out and get an invitation to our monthly calls, the 60 Minutes with Main Street. Those are open to everyone. So you don't have to, you'll get a little bit more benefit out of it. It will make a little bit more sense if you're a participating Main Street community, but you can still attend and participate if you're not. And that might give you a sense of whether Main Street is a good fit for your community. Yeah.
I have a question kind of based on a comment in the chat. It says Main Street is difficult in the very small communities as they don't have chambers or formally organized entities, and unincorporated communities face challenges. Does the Main Street program account for any potential coalition or partnerships with some of these smaller entities?
Yeah, definitely. So it can also be just the city or county. They can be the Main Street entities. So in a number of smaller communities, it's like our contact is literally the mayor, that's who runs the Main Street program. So it doesn't need to be this broader coalition necessarily. It doesn't need to be the chamber. It doesn't need to be a downtown association. Those are just common organizations that come in as the Main Street entity. But it can be any representative who wants to spearhead that or put together a group to form the Main Street Community Association. And then I would say the requirements for maintaining your status as a Main Street community, sometimes they get a bad rap, but they're really actually quite minimal. So it is quarterly reporting. You submit a quarterly report to our team at Commerce, and you just report on major developments within the community. So any big projects, any new businesses, any big events, that kind of thing. And it's one, so that we have a constant line of contact, because if we have these quarterly reports, then it's really easy for us to recognize when a community is falling off the radar and we're not in contact with them as often, or when we've lost the contact due to turnover or something like that. So it's a way to stay in contact, but it's also a way to gauge what the various needs of the communities are so that we can shape our 60 Minutes of Main Street and other resources around what people are telling us is happening on the ground in the communities. So it's not meant to be a deterrent. It's more just a way for us to better serve the communities that are in the program. Other questions? All right, thank you.
All right, thanks to all of our speakers on resources. So thank you all for hanging in to yes, little round of applause for our speakers. Thank you all.